of the Department of Future Technologies. So I will tell a few words on the department and also a little bit of this program for today. And then after that, we will start with the keynote presentation at 1 o'clock. The Department of Future Technology is one of the very few departments which is not named after any academic discipline. So it's basically a non-disciplinary unit. We happen to give, though, degrees in computer science, information technology, and now from the beginning of this year also in phonetics. But of course, we might expect there will be more to join us. So to tell a little bit about how I see the agenda of the department, and I gave it the name SALT. I'm just on my way back from South Africa, and this is, of course, what comes to our mind when we think of Africa. This is actually from Muizenberg. Muizenberg is the South African surfing paradise. So it collects a lot of people there, to just enjoy life and enjoy everything. And you can see that in that paradise, there is also this one unit called African Institute for Mathematical Studies. And that actually holds several programs. One of them is Next Einstein. And the idea of Next Einstein project is actually to find the talent from the slums, from the townships, from poor areas. It is run and it was established by a professor of mathematics from Oxford, and they give like one year-long master's courses where they invited the best mathematicians to stay there like for 3 weeks, give a course, and probably also serve. Our new Institute of Complex Systems and Department of Mathematics is actually working with this unit. But this is only like one phase of South Africa. When you walk maybe an hour or so you come to a different kind of South Africa. That's called Kielitsa, which is a township with more than 1 million people living here. And of course, the idea is to see how much we could get talent from this community. I don't know how many of you have heard of the water problem in Cape Town. They are going to close the pipelines of water also for this slum and for its 1 million people in early May. That's the estimate right now. And you can imagine what then happens. Then we were talking a lot that this is an example, or is it an instance of a global problem that we somehow need to address in all possible ways, especially ways of doing science. I talked with the African Institute of Mathematical Science, for example, of the importance of data science approaches to understand actually the environmental issues, to be able to actually prevent and actually know them beforehand. I was also talking about like the opportunities of desalination. And they say that actually they have technology ready to desalinate water, drinking water from the ocean. But then what is the problem? The problem is the salt. Because if you think that these 1 million people would use like maybe 100 liters water every day, that would end up in having like, depending on the level of the salt, like easily, tens of millions of salt every day. So what can you do with the salt? So this tells a little bit about the complexity of this world. And the Department of Future Technologies is really focused on being very creative and very open-minded to address the global challenges. And we all know that they vary a lot. So, whereas many of our fellow research fields are working on questions like what and why, so our mission is to work on the questions of how. So how can we solve these things? How we can make this world better than it is right now? And how we can involve people, ordinary people, in this exercise. We also very much want to know that we are opening like 8 new professorships and other permanent faculty positions we are very much also expecting to get applications from outside Finland. We want this place really to be a place where we can get and attract talent from all around the world to come. And we want to look forward. If you think of the very classic, actually it's from the Judaic literature, that also I just double-checked that is also mentioned in Quran. We know the city of Gomorrah and Gomorrah, you know, which was the place where you were exploiting things and where you were abusing talent. Now the calling was to get out of that place where you exploit talent and abuse talent. But you should get out and not look backwards. There was some exception, you know, the wife of Lot actually looked back and she turned into salt. And I think that this is a very important reminder of us that we should not look backwards, we should move forward so that we do not transform into salt. This is the Cape of Good Hope, which originally was named as Cape of Storms because it was almost impossible to navigate. But then when Vasco da Gama actually managed to navigate, it was renamed as Cape of Good Hope. And I hope, even if it's a bit poetic, I would like to see that our department is an institution of good hope, where we really can make solutions that would benefit the world. And let me just try to use. Okay, now it's something else. Where can we get this picture now? Mistä sä ton? This is what I see. Okay, good, thanks. Okay, thank you very much. So it takes a lot of computer scientists to run one computer. So anyway, after this opening, we will go to the next presentation, which is chaired by Teijo Lehto, and it's all about encounters. First, we see, like, you know, how a human encounters with technology, and then the encounter of industry and academia, and the third one would be like encounter with the rest of the world and addressing the global challenges. We are going to have, you know, quite a few showcases of research up there in the department, and then there is also cocktails event, you know, later. Yeah. Okay, or maybe even mute. Okay. Okay, something like that. Okay. But before we go on, I would like to just, you know, get here to the podium our newly appointed professor of practice, Ossi Kalevo. If you can tell a little bit, you were just recently appointed, you are one of our first professors of practice, and the idea of professor of practice is to get experts from industry who can also catalyze what we do at the department, who can get other ideas and complementary ideas. So it's very happy to have you as part of our faculty, and maybe you can tell a little bit about yourself, Ossi.
Yes, hello. It's my pleasure to be here today and see all of you. I have been formerly working for Nokia Corporation.
You can talk a little bit closer.
And in this Nokia time, I was developing digital cameras. Currently, I'm developing data compression methods, and in past, I have also created some solutions for X.264 video codec standard that is currently the most used video coding standards. And I hope that in future I will meet many of you and discuss a lot of issues together.
Thank you, Ossi, very much. And I don't know, but anyway, can you mention a little bit about the background that what you have invented earlier in the career? So what we might expect you to invent also in the years to come.
Yes, if somebody is familiar with Nokia PointView technology in digital cameras, I have been the main inventor of this technology. The idea was developed in 2002 and 2012 it was putting into the market, and it was the most megapixel digital camera in that time in the market, and it was in the mobile device. And as I already mentioned, I also have developed those couple of inventions and patents in this H.264 video coding standards, and it is really the most commonly used technology in the world in video coding.
Thank you very much. So the idea, yes. Welcome, Ossi, and of course the idea with Professor of Practice is that we sort of stimulate each other, and that's how, you know, we get up into ideas that no one was thinking before. And certainly I hope that also, you know, students would come up with ideas like how really to make this collaboration even more concrete. Okay, so in a few minutes we will start the next presentation. So like 4 minutes time, so maybe you can come over and start preparing yours. And Dr. Teijo Lehtonen is going to take over. Once again, feel welcome.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We start by assess some robots using humans. So as we are familiar, artificial intelligence is one of the key technologies that we will be using in various applications in the future. The technology gives us lots of promises, but there are also various challenges in making the use of these technologies. And we are honored to have Dr. David Levi here to give us a talk from one angle of the artificial intelligence research. Dr. David Levi studied originally pure mathematics, statistics and physics at St Andrews University in Scotland. Lovely music somewhere. So. The development of David's interest in artificial intelligence started with computer chess, which was a logical combination of his addiction to chess and his work in the field of computing. Back in 1968, he started a bet with 4 artificial intelligence professors that he would not lose a chess match against a computer program within 10 years. He won that bet, and another one for a further 5 years, succumbing only 21 years after making the first bet, and then to a forerunner to the program that eventually defeated Garry Kasparov in 1997. Since 1977, David has led the development of more than 100 chess-playing and other microprocessor-based programs for consumer electronic products. He still works in this field, leading a small team of developers based mainly in the UK. David's interest in artificial intelligence expanded beyond computer games into other areas of AI, including human-computer conversation. In 1994, he brought together a team to investigate pragmatic solutions to the problem, resulting in his winning the Loebner Prize competition in New York in 1997. He won the prize again in 2009. David's achievements in the associated field of social robotics include founding international conferences on the subject and being a co-organizer of 6 such conferences between 2007 and 2017. He has published a primer on AI, Robots Unlimited, and his 50th book, Love and Sex with Robots, was published in November 2007, shortly after he was awarded a PhD by the University of Maastricht for his thesis entitled Intimate Relationships with Artificial Partners. So we are pleased to hear David's talk today with the topic Love, Sex and Marriage with Robots. We are happy to take questions after the presentation. David.
Let me try out if we can get the voice without the...
Hello, can you hear me at the back? Yes? Yep. Good. Thank you, Teo, for that introduction and for inviting me to Finland for the first time in my life. I'm a great fan of Sibelius and I've always wanted to come here, so I'm very pleased to be here. I want to invite you for the next 40 minutes or so to join me in an exploration of the limits of artificial intelligence. What will it mean for society when artificial intelligence researchers succeed in creating sophisticated artificial personalities, artificial emotions, and artificial consciousness? And when robots are also endowed with the ability to recognize what we say and what we mean, and to carry on interesting, amusing, intelligent, and friendly, even loving conversations with us. How will society react to this new breed of person? How will people react to robots that say, I love you, and mean it? These are some of the questions that have fascinated me for the past few years while researching and writing about the possibility of love, sex, and marriage with robots. Next slide, please. It seems to me that such relationships are inevitable within the next few decades. I believe that society will regard them as being perfectly normal by the middle of this century. Next slide. Let me explain why I am so convinced of this. It's based on my investigations into the parallels between the reasons why we humans fall in love with other humans and the reasons why I believe people will be falling in love with robots. And there is a similar comparison for sex. I began my research by looking at the question, why do we fall in love? I discovered from the research psychology literature that of the 10 or so major reasons why we humans fall in love with other humans, most of them have parallels when we come to consider the possibility that many people might fall in love with the robots of the future. Next slide, please. One of the major reasons that have been identified by research psychologists as contributing to the falling in love process between humans is known as reciprocal liking. Peter is more likely to fall in love with Mary if Peter knows that Mary already likes or loves him. Now, a robot can be programmed to simulate affection for its human. So Peter becomes aware that his robot is being affectionate towards him, and he is then more likely to start to reciprocate by feeling affection for the robot. Next slide, please. Another of the major reasons for falling in love is similarity. Two people are more likely to fall in love if they are similar in some respects. This might be similar interests, similar personalities, similar religious views, for example. So if a user is fond of Beethoven and a robot is endowed with knowledge about Beethoven's music, and perhaps in addition programmed with personality traits similar to those of the user, that robot will have a head start in its attempts to engender love from its human. Next slide, please. Yet another reason for falling in love is being alone with the objects of one's affection. In the case of robots, that it's very easy to achieve. It will happen as soon as the user buys one and takes it home. Next slide. And so it goes on as we consider the 10 major factors one by one. For just about all of them, it's reasonable to argue that a robot could be endowed with the human-like characteristics that act as a catalyst in building affectionate relationships. Next slide. Let us now move on to the subject of sex, and in particular to the questions, what motivates us to have sex, and why do we enjoy sex? Here too we can observe some interesting parallels by studying the literature from research psychology. It turns out that the most significant motivations identified by research psychologists for having sex, and some of the main reasons why we enjoy sex, have their own parallels when we come to consider the idea of sex with robots. Next slide. So far as sexual motivations are concerned, an interesting perspective can be cast on the subject by examining the reasons most frequently given by the clients of prostitutes as to why they pay for sex, what they get out of the experience. The reason most often cited by the clients is a desire for variety, both variety in the sexual partner and variety in the sexual experiences that the partner is willing to share with the client. Another motivation is the wish for a sexual encounter that does not involve the client in any longer-term obligation to enter into a relationship. But consider this, both of these motivations can be satisfied by sex with robots, which can be manufactured to be beautiful or handsome, of any desired size and physical characteristics, designed with the capabilities of delivering any type of sexual experience, and programmed to avoid making any demands for gifts, expensive dinners, exotic holidays, or longer-term commitments. As to the parallels between the joy of sex between humans and the pleasures to be had from sex with robots, the clearest parallel is the pure physical pleasure of orgasm. There are businesses in Japan, in the USA, and in Europe that manufacture realistic-looking sex dolls, lifelike sex dolls, human-sized sex dolls, selling for up to $10,000 or even more. These dolls are made from silicone or other artificial materials, dolls that have no moving parts or other robotics components, yet can apparently deliver sexual satisfaction to their high-price paying customers. Robots can already climb stairways, play the trumpet, conduct symphony orchestras, and move in other human-like ways. When robots appear on the market that move like a human in bed, gasp and moan like a human, and behave in other human-like ways during sex, what will be the effect on those who try out these robots? And how will this affect society's attitudes to sex? What kind of sexual animals will we become as a result? Next slide, please. Looking around this lecture theatre, I can see some of you looking at me in disbelief. Sex with robots? What a ridiculous idea. But fast rewind 100 years. Was the idea of same-sex marriage not totally unthinkable? Wasn't oral sex strongly disapproved of by the vast majority? Wasn't masturbation thought to be physically and psychologically damaging to the point that the medical profession was almost totally against the practice? Yet today, all of these attitudes have been turned on their heads. Same-sex unions have been legalized. Oral sex is almost de rigueur in the majority of sexual relationships. And in 1972, the American Medical Association pronounced masturbation to be perfectly normal and healthy. My, how sexual attitudes and mores have changed with time. How much more will they change in the coming decades? Enough, I believe, to make sex with robots a normal and widely accepted practice within the next 20 years. Next slide. If you get involved in discussing human-robot relationships, you will quite likely find a number of people making the argument, if it isn't human, how can you love it? To answer this question, consider the following trend in human emotional attachments. Next slide. Let us first consider the love that many people exhibit for their pet animals and for their virtual pets. Some pet owners derive even more satisfaction from their pet relationships than they do from their social relationships with other people. Love for a pet is often very strong and can be manifested in various ways. The offer of a reward for a missing animal, an owner leaving an extraordinarily large sum of money in their will for the care of their pet after they die, even making the pet a millionaire. Spending considerable amounts on pet food, health care, and sometimes on their animals' grooming and clothing. And interacting with their pets in ways redolent of human-human relationships, by giving them names, feeding them from their own plates at mealtimes, celebrating their birthdays, allowing them to sleep on their owners' beds, talking to them and considering them as members of the family. And when a pet dies, the intensity of the owner's feelings of grief will often be very similar to those experienced with the bereavement of a spouse or partner. Sometimes an owner's love for their pet is seen in bizarre news reports. A bridegroom designating his dog as best man at his wedding. A divorcing couple battling in the courts over the custody of their pet. There is even a website, marryyourpet.com, that offers owners the opportunity to, quote, marry their pets, for a suitable fee, of course. Would you not agree that all of these manifestations of love are also appropriate ways to treat human loved ones? Next slide. Now let us transfer the focus of our attention from pet animals to virtual pets, such as the hugely popular Japanese invention, the Tamagotchi. A virtual pet is usually driven by a computer chip that has been programmed to exhibit a few virtual needs, a few virtual emotions, and some elements of a virtual personality. Being driven by a computer chip means that a virtual pet is, in essence, a computer in different clothing, just as a robot is a computer in different clothing. That we humans have evolved from a race that has the capacity to love our pet animals to a race that similarly has the capacity to form very strong emotional attachments to Tamagotchis, to another Japanese invention, the Aibo robotic dog, and to other types of virtual pet. That is surely indicative of the way that the human propensity for loving is developing, from pet animals to virtual pets, and then to sophisticated robots, which after all will just be a technologically more advanced form of virtual pet. Why should we doubt that this development will take place? Why should the human race not extend, yet again, its horizons for to whom and on what we bestow our affections? Will we not treat sophisticated robots with all their artificial personality, artificial emotion, artificial consciousness, and great conversational and love-making skills, much as we do other people? Next slide. Let us now pause for a moment to summarize the trends we've been examining so far. Human emotional attachments have developed from being only for other humans to being for pet animals and then for electronic pets. Sex technologies are fast coming onto the market and will take over from the immobile sex dolls that have been selling for many years. And sexual attitudes and mores have developed dramatically during the past few decades. So the next shift in society's attitudes towards intimate relationships is almost certain to be towards sex with technological products such as robots. Next slide. Not all of you will agree with my predictions, but before the skeptics amongst you decide that emotional relationships with robots are very unlikely to appeal, please consider the following situation. From the other end of an internet chat line comes the image of a virtual friend. You hear the seductive tones of its voice. You smell its artificial bodily scent, and it is endowed with all of the artificially intelligent characteristics that will be known to AI researchers 2 or 3 decades from now. You sit looking at this image, talking to it, and savoring its fragrance. Its looks, its voice, and its personality appeal to you, and you find its conversation stimulating, entertaining, and loving. Might you fall in love with this companion? Of course you might. Why shouldn't you? Pen-friend relationships long ago, when people used to write letters to each other to send through the post, and before the telephone spread throughout the world, pen-friend relationships established that people can fall in love without being able to see or hear the object of their love. So it is clear that being able to see it, finding its looks to your liking, being able to hear its sexy voice, and being physically attracted by its simulated body fragrance can only strengthen the affection, the love that you might develop even in the absence of sight, sound, and smell. I hope that this brief explanation has opened your minds to the possibilities of such relationships. And if you ask yourself why anyone would want to have a loving and intimate relationship with a robot, stop for a moment to think about all those millions of people in this world who are lonely, who have no one to love and no one who loves them. People for whom rewarding, loving, and sexual relationships are only a dream. Think about the great voids in their lives that could be filled by a loving robot. For those people, the question will not be, isn't it better to have a relationship with a human than one with a robot? For those people, the question will be, isn't it better to have a relationship with a robot than no relationship at all? Next slide, please. And now to marriage with robots. Arthur Harkins, an anthropology professor at the University of Minnesota, caused astonishment in the mid-1970s when he predicted that before the year 2000, the first test case of a human-robot marriage would be in the courts. At that time, the media bombarded Harkins with requests for interviews, many of which were on TV talk shows with a phone-in audience. And as people called in, Harkins told us, once they got over their initial shock, their next question was invariably the same. Next slide, please. Where do I get one? Clearly, Harkins' estimated timescale was wrong, but today his prediction of the coming of human-robot marriage is very much on the robotics roadmap. Social change is happening faster now than it did 200, 100, or even 50 years ago, with the result that changes in the meaning and purpose of marriage are also happening faster than ever before, and the rate of such change seems certain to accelerate. Nancy Cott, who is Professor of American History at Harvard, has chronicled the changing face and meaning of marriage, and has described the changes as being characteristic of marriage because marriage is not a static institution. Nancy Cott also points out that in the late 20th century, marriage moved towards the spouses themselves defining what the appropriate marital role or preference is. This newfound freedom for couples to define their respective roles within their marriages now extends into the realm of legal agreement. And Elizabeth Bartholet, holder of the Wassman Public Interest Chair in Law at Harvard, observed that the legal context of marriage has shifted from the state having enormous control over marriage to people writing the terms of their own marriage and being allowed to have premarital contracts. Furthermore, Bartholet comments that the trend of recognizing de facto relationships means that if you look like a family, feel and smell like a family, if you cook meals together, if you share bank accounts, then you are a family for the purpose of the law. As robots become increasingly sophisticated, as people have them in their homes as companions, when people have sex with them and fall in love with them, so it will become appropriate for lawmakers to paraphrase Elizabeth Bartholet's argument thus: if your robot looks like a partner, feels and smells like a partner, you and your robot cook meals together, share bank accounts, then you are partners for the purposes of the law. And as to the question of a robot being legally able to consent to its marriage, in an analogy to Turing's test for intelligence, if a robot says that it consents and behaves in every way consistent with being a consenting adult, then it does consent. Any discussion of marriage to a robot raises the question, what type of entity should we consider an intelligent robot to be? How should we categorize it? Robot personhood is steadily becoming a significant issue for lawmakers and those working in the field of social robotics. What laws should apply as to how we may treat robots, and what laws will the robots need to obey? The legal rights of robots is a topic which has been debated now for more than 30 years, starting with a prescient 1985 paper by Robert Freitas Jr. with exactly that title, The Legal Rights of Robots. The time is fast approaching when the theoretical debate must evolve into laws, and the consequences of those laws will be staggering. So we should ask ourselves, what should be the legal status of robots? Now consider this. a person with a prosthetic arm is still a person, as is someone with 2, 3, or 4 prosthetic limbs. So a person does not lose their personhood for undergoing augmentation by a prosthetic, nor is a person with an artificial heart any less human as a result. So the question arises, would someone whose brain has undergone augmentation or partial replacement be any less human? And what about someone with a wholly artificial brain? Since a person does not lose their personhood just because they have one or more artificial parts, I argue that a robot does not necessarily lack the right to personhood just because it is built differently from a human. Nor is that difference alone necessarily sufficient reason to deny a robot many of the same rights and protections ascribed to humans. Since 1927, Time magazine has awarded an annual accolade to recognize remarkable worldwide achievements. In 1982, their title, Man of the Year, went to the personal computer. More recently, the title was renamed Person of the Year, and I speculate that before many more years have passed, it will be awarded to the humanoid robot, such as their fast-approaching encroachment on and integration into society, and their rapid acquisition of the characteristics and qualities usually associated with personhood. Restrictive laws affecting the institution of marriage have undergone a massive reinvention in the Western world since the middle of the 20th century. Until 1967, some American states still banned interracial marriage. The US government's position on the matter was that each state had the right to decide for itself whether or not to permit marriage across the divide between blacks and whites. It was only following a Supreme Court decision in 1967 that interracial marriage in the USA was finally made legal in all US states. The legalization of same-sex marriage happened even more recently. The first legalized same-sex marriage in a Western country took place in the Netherlands, a land with a healthy, liberal attitudes to lifestyle choices. The Dutch Parliament had set up a special commission in 1995 to investigate the issue, and following the Commission's recommendations, a same-sex marriage law was passed by the Dutch House of Representatives and the Dutch Senate in the year 2000, coming into effect on April 1st, 2001. Since then, the Dutch innovation has been followed by similar laws in a number of other European countries, as well as Canada, South Africa, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, New Zealand, and Colombia, and in 2015 by the United States, where President Obama, 3 years earlier, had become the first sitting US president to publicly declare his support for same-sex marriage to be legalized. More recently, Australia voted just a few weeks ago to pass such laws. During the years leading up to the American Supreme Court decision in 2015, public opinion moved in the same direction as Obama's thinking had been. A poll taken by CNN in August 2010 revealed that 49% of those surveyed believed that gay and lesbian couples have a constitutional right to marry. By February 2015, that support had risen to 63%, a jump of 14% in just 5 years. Other polls conducted by Gallup and by the Washington Post show similar increases in support. The rapidity of this increase over a time span of just a few years demonstrates that nowadays public attitudes to such intimate matters can undergo rapid liberalizing change. This doesn't surprise me at all. During the past couple of years or so, I've observed a steady increase in the frequency with which I'm asked to give media interviews on the subject of robot sex, and I'm asked about robot marriage, and there's been a corresponding increase in the amount of media exposure for these subjects. This increase points to a near future in which robot sex will be a very hot topic, and with it will come an intensification of the debate on the subject of human-robot marriage. Nancy Cott observes that marriage itself has come in for a broad reassessment because the polarizing views of the advocates of same-sex marriage and their opponents who are oriented in favor of so-called family values. Cott explains that as same-sex couples line up for marriage licenses at courthouses across Massachusetts, opponents predict the death of marriage itself. One side sees tragedy in the making, the other side wants to rewrite the script entirely. It is my belief that marriage to robots will be one of the byproducts of the rewriting of the script, a belief rooted in the type of argument employed by those judges who have ruled in support of same-sex marriage. In 1998, for example, in a Superior Court ruling in Alaska, Judge Peter Michalski called the right to choose one's life partner constitutionally fundamental, a privacy right that ought to receive protection, whatever its outcome, even a partner of the same sex. Judge Michalski ruled that government intrusion into the choice of a life partner encroaches on the intimate personal decisions of the individual. The relevant question is not whether same-sex marriage is so rooted in our traditions that it is a fundamental right, but whether the freedom to choose one's own life partner is so rooted in our traditions. Michalski's 1998 ruling, and many since then, have pointed the way not only to a liberalising of the legislature's attitudes to same-sex marriage, but also to a strengthening of the attitude towards the right to choose. In summary, marriage is changing at such a rate that there appears to be ever-increasing levels of acceptance and tolerance of how any given couple wish to conduct their lives together. And as part of the right to choose will come the right to choose one's spouse, even a robot spouse. By the time that today's young teenagers are entering matrimony, many of them will be deciding for themselves almost all the rules and laws that are to govern their union. By the time that their children are ready for marriage, around the middle of this century, I believe that such a freedom of decision will be exercised sufficiently widely to encompass marriage to robots. I suspect that the majority of people who join the robot marriage debate will, for the next 2 or 3 decades, argue that a marriage can only be between two humans and not between one human and a pet, a robot, or some other non-human entity. Religion is one reason for opposing same-sex marriage, but it is not at all clear that the same religious arguments will hold much water when applied to the concept of human-robot marriage. After all, so far as I am aware, nowhere in the Bible, the Talmud, or the Quran does it say anything against other types of marriage. Nowhere does it say that a marriage must be between two humans. Even more relevant to the concept of marriage to robots will be the question, to what extent will the new freedoms of choice regarding marriage extend to a choice of who or what people will be legally allowed to marry? In their paper, Robot Marriage and the Law, Mark Goldfeder and Joseph Razin discussed 3 threshold requirements for marriage. These thresholds are requirements that they believe robots will have to meet in order for human-robot marriages to qualify for legalized status, namely consent, understanding, and the capacity to make decisions. If a robot appears to wish to marry by virtue of what it says and how it behaves, then following Turing's philosophy, why should we not assume that it does indeed consent? Similarly, if a robot appears by its behavior, both actions and words, to understand the meaning of marriage, then we should accept at face value that the robot does indeed have that level of understanding. Goldfeder and Razin argue that a person can indicate their understanding of what marriage means simply by responding positively to a statement such as, "Let's get married." How much understanding is that? Not very much. As the Supreme Court of the state of Arkansas ruled in a 2008 decision, consent does not have to be particularly informed or well-reasoned. Goldfeder and Razin apply this concept to robots and conclude that sophisticated robots are more than capable of instrumental reasoning, that is, performing cost-benefit analysis and deciding on the best way to proceed in the furtherance of their own best interests. In the context of robot marriage, this means that robots are more than capable of deciding or consenting to marry. The capacity to make decisions is Goldfeder and Razin's 3rd requirement for a robot person to be allowed to marry. A decision to consent to marriage must of course be voluntary and not obtained by coercion, but there's no requirement for the decision to be rational. And as Goldfeder and Razin point out, it can be impulsive. For more than half a century now, artificial intelligence programs have been able to perform well at tasks that require planning and decision-making, and many such software systems have demonstrated their superiority over the decision-making skills of leading human experts. Given that software can decide which move to make in a chess game better than a human world champion, it is difficult to deny the possibility that the robots of the future decades will be able to decide who or what they want to marry. It could even be another robot. In conclusion, love, sex, and marriage have undergone enormous changes since the mid-20th century. Not only changes in society's attitudes to them, but also in terms of people's willingness to talk about them openly. Even a single generation ago, it would have been almost unthinkable for a conference to invite a talk on this subject. But with advances coming thick and fast in computing, in AI in general, and in robotics in particular, we are being forced to contemplate what human-robot relationships will be like a generation or two from now. As Sherry Turkle asks in her book, Alone Together, which investigates how technology will change us, what will we be like? What type of people will we become? Transposing Turkle's questions to social robotics, it could be paraphrased thus. How will we come to regard robots? What will our relationships with robots be like? And just how far will our relationships with robots extend? In my book, Love and Sex with Robots, I provide ample explanations as to how and why many people will be falling in love with robots during the coming decades. And Sex with Robots is just around the corner, with the first sex bots from California expected in the next few months. As love and sex with robots become more and more commonplace, not only as subjects for academic and public discussion, but also in practice, so we shall come face to face with the very real possibility of marriage to robots. When robots are sufficiently human-like and sufficiently appealing socially, to the point where they can act as our companions, why not extend that companionship to marriage if neither party is against the idea? As Professor Gary Marchant has opined, robot-human marriage is about the right of a human to choose to marry a robot. As more and more people come to accept the concepts of sex and love with robots, so society as a whole will develop laws to govern human-robot relationships. And as those laws evolve, so the current laws that prevent human-robot marriages will become obsolete. By the time there are no laws to prevent human-robot marriages, robots will be patient, kind, protective, loving, trusting, truthful, persevering, respectful, uncomplaining, complimentary, pleasant to talk to, and sharing your sense of humor. And the robots of the future will not be jealous, boastful, arrogant, rude, self-seeking, or easily angered, unless, of course, you want them to be. So when the law allows it, why not marry a robot? Thank you.
Thank you, David. Now we have a possibility to have a couple of questions. I think Kai was the first one.
Hi, hello. I'm Kai Kimpo. I'm an IT and ethics researcher here at the University of Turku. I was wondering, what do you think about the critiques from feminist philosophers like, say, Kathleen Richardson, who has complained that there is a possibility that sex robots or robots with which you have relationships might be misused in the sense that, for example, violent sex or child sex with childlike robots, and then that might carry over to the behavior of the people who do things like that with the robots than the real world. Just a question.
It's a very good question, and it's one that I'm often asked. The answer is we won't know really which way the coin will fall until there are many, many robots in the world that have been used for sexual purposes. There are two arguments, for example, on the question of childlike sex robots. One argument says childlike sex robots should be banned, they should be illegal and punished by imprisonment because they're going to encourage people who are paedophiles or who might become paedophiles. The other side of the argument is that childlike sex robots can be used by psychoanalysts to help cure paedophiles of their predilections and thereby to reduce paedophilia. And of course, a paedophile who is having sex with a robot is not at the same time having sex with a child, so it could actually act as a reduction. Now, I think both arguments are perfectly reasonable arguments, but we won't know until there are possibly hundreds of thousands of social robots in the world that have sexual functionality, and it's been possible for lawmakers, lawkeepers and psychiatrists to come to some conclusions based on empirical research.
Next question over there.
Lauri Grön, Synesthesia Software Music. You are claiming that master-slave relation can be called as marriage. I think it's moral and conceptual rubbish.
Well, I understand your point of view and I respect your opinion, and I can see how you can argue that. However, it seems to me that if the robot is behaving in a very human-like way, it doesn't actually become a master-slave relationship. Furthermore, I'm absolutely certain that robots of the future, of the long-term future, will be programmed so that the user can set them to argue and disagree and refuse in a certain percentage of the time. So, for example, if the human feels that the robot is too argumentative, the human can say to the robot, "I wish you'd stop arguing with me so much." And if the human feels that the robot is too bland and too submissive, the human can say to the robot, "I wish you wouldn't be so submissive." So I think on the basis of the technology of the future, I think we can stamp out the concept of master-slave relationship.
We will now have the comment talk, and then we can have more questions after that.
Okay.
If you can ask you. Yes. So we have the pleasure of having a comment talk from Professor Elina Pirjataniemi. She is Professor of Constitutional and International Law and Director of the Institute for Human Rights at Åbo Academic University. She says that she has never thought about marrying a robot, but she has done research on issues that touch upon the possibilities and limits of law, such as research on the rights of future generations.
Yeah, thank you very much. To begin with, this very room is the room where we used to write our exams as law students. And when I'm stressed, I always come back in my nightmares to this room. And I'm writing these endless, law exams, and I don't have a pen, and I don't have time. And now I'm standing here in front of you, ladies and gentlemen, and others, friends of science, and I'm about to talk about sex with robots. So let's see how my nightmares will be after this event. But I still want to thank the organizers for the opportunity to present some of my thoughts after this keynote, very thought-provoking keynote by David Levy. David, if I may. The background shortly, Professor Erkki Sutinen called me the other day and asked whether I could give some comments on a presentation regarding love, sex, and marriage with robots. And I thought that this request was so crazy that there was no way in the world to turn down this invitation. So Erkki, thank you very much for asking me that question. And just a disclaimer, as I'm a lawyer, I want to say that I do not know that much about artificial intelligence, and some of my comments may sound a bit ridiculous to you, but they also show where maybe you need to be more detailed in your communication. So let's take that on board as well. So I approach this topic from a legal or ethical perspective, more focus on the legal. And as already was indicated, my research area is law and human rights law in particular. And that background, of course, colors my comments, that's obvious. But before addressing the topic as such, I would want to give you a short course on law so that we are on a same level in all this, and kind of indicate what is the role of law and rights in all this. And I would say, first of all, that legal rules and rights as part of them are tools that give our common life as some sort of a structure. I'm a Western lawyer, and as such, I'm a positivist. That is, that I strongly believe that laws can be changed. They are negotiable, they are changeable, they are not a product of any divine power, etc., etc. There are, of course, other legal cultures, but this is the approach I have. So we can together change the rules if we think that they do not fit the purposes we think are important or crucial. That's something which is very useful in law. So law and legal rights are kind of, there's a certain dynamics in them. We can do things, we can push development forward with law. But on the other hand, what makes then law interesting is that law is also a kind of guardian of order and tradition. So we have this static, this kind of, I would say, a kind of delicate balancing act all the time. How much should we go? What should we keep? So we are, as lawyers, we are there in the middle, trying to find out a way in all these passions that are around there. So. And of course, very important is also that legal rules, they kind of freeze a certain political solution, and then we can change that. And it's very important to notice that laws do not develop in a vacuum. It's political development, religion, culture, all kinds of things do have an impact on law. So, in other words, many things are possible in law, but the momentum somehow must be right. So we have this law dynamism, tradition, balancing between these. So now you are bachelors of law, all. So the topics of today, let's move to them: love, sex, and marriage. My initial comment as a cold-blooded lawyer is that these three do not necessarily have anything to do with each other. Legally, you may love someone without ever having sex with that person. I guess we all have experienced that. You can have sex without loving the person. You don't have to smile there. And we can have marriage without sex. We can have sex without marriage, etc., etc. So we all know this, but it's important to remind ourselves about this. So these things are not inherently linked, and that's why I also want to approach them topic by topic, even though we tend to normally in the culture link them together. But they are not, in law, they are not necessarily linked. So, but let's move on. So out of these three, love, the first one, is clearly most boring for the lawyer. Some might say that we only love our money, but that's for you to say. But love is not important for us at all. Namely, because who you love is your own business. It's your thoughts. And your thoughts, whatever they are strongly protected by human rights and law. You may think whatever, and the law shouldn't have anything to say about it. And interestingly, though, you may love your pet, or you may love your vacuum cleaner, for that matter, and you may write an erotic poem to your vacuum cleaner. I don't know why I chose that as an example. I hate my vacuum cleaner, but anyway, you understand what I mean. So you may also express your love to certain point. Your relatives might be a bit, but that's not legally relevant. So, but. Of course, the problem becomes when you start doing things, when you love something and you start acting. And then we come to the interesting part, that is to sex. And that's, of course, I would say, sex and marriage are then important and interesting from the legal perspective, as they have clearly legal consequences. And I try to handle them separately here. So we start from sex, and I already said that sex is interesting also for a lawyer for several reasons. But first of all, it's interesting that the society has anything to say about sex, because it's a very, very private matter. What kind of preferences we have, it's very private. But still, there has been, as David also showed, during the history, all kinds of restrictions, what kind of sex we are supposed to have and with whom, etc., etc. And we also heard how this has changed. And this is certainly something that was illustrated very clearly in David's presentation, that things that were totally impossible are totally possible and normal today. And having said that, from a legal perspective, we are not totally free. not yet either. There are certain taboos that we respect, like sex with minors, which was already mentioned here, at least indirectly. Sex with animals is seen as a taboo, and so forth. And even sick, and in many cultures it's also punishable, and so forth. But and there are other restrictions. Prostitution is a very difficult issue. There are those who are very much against it because of different reasons, and there are those who think it's okay, between consenting adults at least. And there, in all these prohibitions, the kind of basic line there somewhere is that we shouldn't have sex that is harmful to yourself or to someone else. But what about sex with robots? I really have been thinking about this, and is it? I mean, I try to think: is it harmful? As long as we have, as the robot is kind of is the child-like robots. That might be a dilemma, but. I would be possible to argue also legally that it shouldn't be a problem from the legal perspective, because what is really a robot? It's actually, I mean, it's a sex toy, very intelligent, and we do accept that as well. And nota bene, remember that it's a private issue. What kind of preferences we have, that shouldn't be, society shouldn't have that much opinions about that. So from a strict legal perspective, I as long as we kind of can handle this harmfulness dimension, it shouldn't be a problem. But as was also already mentioned here in this short dialogue, so there are of course issues that we need to ponder upon. It's not a straightforward road here. I mean, what about childlike robots, as was mentioned, and what kind of what does it do to us as persons when we all of a sudden may have sex with these childlike robots, for instance. But that's for psychologists and others to ponder upon. So conclusion is that it shouldn't be that great of a problem. There are, of course, differences, enormous differences between cultures. I'm talking as a liberal lawyer coming from a liberal Western tradition here now. What about the marriage? And this is, of course, marriage is for there again, I need to emphasize that marriage is for lawyers, contrary to laymen, only a contract. It is a contract, important contract between two consenting adults, which has very important economic consequences. We don't necessarily have any romantic understandings of marriages in that sense. But of course, marriage as such has been for a long time of importance for lawmakers. And why is that? Because as David also showed, the concept of marriage and the understanding what the role of marriage in a society has changed a lot. And it has been the church, it has been all kinds of institutions that have been interested in marriage. And these sentiments still are there, but the development has moved forward indeed. One issue which is important in why society is interested in marriage, and marriage is a public contract, it is because of economy. Actually it's a contract concerning whose money is where, whose resources are shared, etc., etc. So there is certainly interest in that concept also in future. But when it comes to the problems I have, or something I would like to know more about concerning robots and marriages, I have, first of all, a kind of pragmatic question, and nota bene again that I'm not very good at artificial intelligence. I don't understand how clever the robots can be, and I don't know how clever they are at the moment. But somehow I think that if we rip off all the romantic stuff and see the contract, that marriage is a contract between me and the other one, why should we use the complicated contract form as marriage in order to regulate the relationship between robots and humans? But that's a kind of pragmatic question, and I'm open for arguments here. But if we put, as I said earlier, that laws do not develop in vacuum, and culture and politics also have an influence on the legal, then we can put we can take maybe a bit of romantics to this concept as well, and we can accept the idea that marriage is a kind of symbolic. It has relevance also as a kind of manifestation of two persons' affection towards each other. And then I could ask that why shouldn't I be able to marry a robot who I truly love if I may choose whoever human being, and that is the question. But then we meet the other dilemma, which was already touched upon in David's presentation, the question of consent. What kind of consent can we require in the legal understanding of marriage and contract? We assume that those who are capable of having or making contracts, they should have the understanding of what they are doing, and they should have the ability to have rights and responsibilities and understand the consequences. But they don't have to be that intelligent or rational as such. So if that threshold, if we come over that threshold and we can say that this robot consents, then maybe we may move forward. But then, of course, if you create, guys, these robots who really have this ability, and then you have the dilemma to convince the legal audience of the fact that we should then change the basic understandings in law. Why do I say that? Because the question who is able to have legal capacity, to have rights, to have responsibilities, it's one of the most profound questions in law. It's very, very difficult to change that. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but it's very difficult. And the discussions concerning, there has been development. I mean, women were not earlier seen as rights holders, and not indigenous peoples or children or disabled persons, but we have moved forward. But for instance, the discussions concerning the rights of animals or rights of nature, rights of future generations, they show that how kind of difficult it is to argue that entities others than humans can have rights. But that can perhaps be changed. But it's a question of law's self-understanding, so you really need to work hard in order to convince us. Finally, a couple of words on human dignity, because when we talk about love, sex, and marriage, I think that, strangely enough, actually, we are talking about the most technological, the future, and all of a sudden we talk about very crucial, basic questions about what it is to be a human. I think it's fascinating. And my enlightened guess is that when you are presenting a proposal to widen the concept of marriage so that it would also cover marriages between humans and robots, then you would meet the dignity argument, that it's against human dignity to do so. Human dignity is an argument which you can defend many positions with that, and we don't have time to go there, but that certainly is something that you would meet in the debate, and it's very difficult to say what it really means. But all in all, I think that all this discussion, even though it may irritate us or puzzle us, it forces us to discuss what it means to be a human being, what it means that we have inherent dignity, what is a human being really. And that's, of course, something that we should go on debating all the time, and that's a debate that never ends. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Elina. Please stay here.
Yeah, sure.
David, would you like to have the first comment on the comments?
Well, I'm very glad that Elina seemed to agree with most of what I was saying. At least that was my impression. The question of dignity is an interesting one, which I haven't actually considered, but I will have to think about that and maybe give a talk on that at some time in the future. Certainly, I agree with her, as I said in my talk, I agree with her completely that the law needs to be examined. As far as what it means to be human and whether animals and nature have rights. This is another subject that's been discussed in the law literature. There was a famous paper I think about almost 30 years ago, called Should Trees Have Standing?
Oh, yeah, that's wonderful.
This paper was about an attempt by, I think it may have been Disney, some entertainment organization in the United States bought up a large area of land which was quite beautiful, and they were going to develop this land into something to make money. And a lawsuit was brought against them on the basis that the trees in the area had rights and shouldn't just be discarded. And there was a trial. The first trial found that basically the developers could go ahead. But then it was appealed, and the appeal was heard by 3 appeal judges. 2 of them supported the original decision, which therefore became the final decision. But one of the judges read this paper, Should Trees Have Standing, and on the basis of that paper he decided that it was wrong to treat trees and nature as something that has no rights at all. So I think that was possibly the beginning of a movement towards ascribing rights to non-humans. And of course for many years we've had in the civilized world rights of animals. You can't just go and hit your dog with a stick all the time. It's against the law in those civilized countries. So I think there is definitely a movement away from the concept that only humans should have rights. It hasn't yet moved far enough so that the rights of robots are respected if they want to get married. But I think we're moving in that direction.
Thank you. We have the possibility to take a few questions from the audience.
Hi, thank you, Doctor. It was a great presentation. As we have a lawyer in the house, I would like to ask a legal question. As we all know, approximately 50% of marriages end in divorce. And from a legal point of view, this opens kind of an interesting point of view. We would have probably robots owning half a house, half a summer place, half a car. And then we get into inheritance, and how that works. What's your legal point of view of robots in a divorce situation, owning stuff and then getting remarried? And the children's position of the original person that were when you have divorced and the robot takes half of the summer place.
This is really going to look like a nightmare. Thank you for the question. Thank you for the question. This is looking like the nightmare I was talking about. But of course, if we start from the, if we have as a starting point that law, the basic concepts in law do not change, that we have the inheritance systems we have at the moment, we have the divorces we have at the moment, then we meet this, and I don't know. But your good questions already indicate that if we allow marriages between robots, then we should also maybe change the concept of marriage and divorces as well, which has not been necessarily the case when we take, for instance, the same-sex marriages. We don't have to do that kind of, because it's not such a profound change of the understanding of marriage. And yeah, lawyers are good at figuring out ways out of tricky situations. So maybe you would need to create a new system and a new kind of marriage and inheritance system.
You've raised an incredibly interesting point here, because there is also the concept of robots owning things. Now let's say that I develop a robot which plays the violin, and it plays the violin so well that it travels the world to all the major concert halls, it gives concert performances, it makes CDs, it makes a huge amount of money from playing the violin. Now that money obviously belongs to the robot. What happens if I'm married to the robot and the robot and I get divorced? Am I entitled to any part of that money?
Just a short question. Can there be robots that are not owned by anyone?
Can there be robots that are not owned by anyone? Well, when they come from the factory, I mean, can anything not be owned by anyone? Only nature, I think. Only something in nature can not be owned by anyone, I would think, but I don't know, it's more of a legal question. I think anything that's made in a factory, somebody owns it, either the factory owns it or the person who paid for it to be made. I can't imagine a situation where a robot could be made that's not owned by anyone. You see, even when we get to the stage that robots are building other robots, which is already happening in a very simple way, and in the future robots will be able to build other robots if they're given the parts, but someone has to provide the parts and pay for the parts. So there has to be, I would think there has to be some ownership somewhere, but you're better placed to answer.
Yeah, the problem is that the kind of legal thinking is very, we have these categories. We have humans who can do things, and then we have things. And robots are, at the moment, robots are things. Animals are also things. Someone has ownership over them. So that is a good question, and concerning marriage again, if you think that you have does marriage require that the other, whoever it is, whatever it is somehow autonomous, and independent from me? I don't know.
Okay, I think we can have one more question. Yeah, over there.
Yeah, so what do you think the broader implications of these robots would be? So will we simply have robots walking around like we now have pets and things go on as before, or do you think we might see obsolescence of human labor, declining birth rate, collapse of civilization, other externalities?
I think the advent of very large numbers of highly sophisticated robots will bring huge changes to society. It's beyond my scope to imagine what those changes might cause, but it's certainly something that policymakers and lawmakers are going to have to consider for the future. There are people who argue that certain types of robots should not be created at all. For example, robots that can be used on the battlefield. I don't subscribe to that view simply because you cannot prevent research, you cannot prevent countries from manufacturing things that those countries want to manufacture. And even if every country was banned from manufacturing robots to be used in the battlefield, if North Korea decided that it would give them an advantage to do so, they would just ignore the regulation and do it. So I don't think we can actually ban any real particular direction of robot development. I think we have to plan with the laws to control the use of different types of robots. And we also have to plan for changes in society. It's interesting, and it's related to your question, that the Japanese government has a serious demographic problem, which they've had now looming for some time, which is that the number of elderly people in Japan is already approaching the point where there are not enough younger people to look after them properly. And so the Japanese government has been pouring massive resources into the development of robots that can be used as carers, can take care of elderly people and help them at home in certain things they have to do, and just generally help to look after them in order to compensate for the fact there aren't enough humans going to be enough humans around to do it. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in Japan in the next 20 years or so. But I think certainly you're right in assuming that there are going to be massive changes to society. What exactly they'll be, I don't know.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions. Unfortunately, we need to stop here for the next speakers to come. Dr. David Levy, Professor Elina Virtaniemi, thank you very much for your...
Thank you, Teijo, also for chairing this session. Actually, I would like to say that this collaboration continues with Dr. David Levy. So we are going to have Professor Adrian Cheok to come to the department as a guest professor from July for half a year, and he's also going to bring his team of 4 other researchers, and this is going to be on AR and AI and remote sensing technologies. Thanks very much for your attention and interest again for working with Dean Professor Tapio Somas. Thanks, Erkki. There are some details of the program, so you can see how it goes.
We have a room full of humans here, so I think if we might need a biological break, now is the time. That's one more thing to add to the virtual list of robots. Yeah. Okay, so while we're having this couple of minutes of general hustle here, so I also have some memories of this very lecture hall. They are not actually nightmarish. And certainly the last hour we spent here in this lecture room is one of the best to remember. I've seen good lectures before. This is among the ones that is easiest to remember later on. Now we also see what actually attracts people, so once you start really thinking out of the box and get up into the sky, blue skies, and thinking stuff, so that's like what attracts people, and now we're getting more down to earth issues. But let's not lose the touch. I think this idea of thinking out of the box and questioning things that we have the tradition of keeping as given. It is part of the line of thinking that led us to the development and establishment of the Department of Future Technology. As Erkki mentioned, so it's in principle a non-disciplinary department, although we are strongly founded on information and communication technology. But that goes for robots as well, right? And still they go for much further. They touch upon all other scientific disciplines, they touch upon business and culture, they touch upon all walks of life. But this is actually what is the role of ICT currently. We cannot think about the comprehensive university without ICT. We cannot think about the modern society without ICT. So while this development of artificial intelligence is more like about the research in ICT and related areas of science and technology, there's also this other aspect of universities, namely the education. And ICT education especially has been a thing that people have thought a lot about in the Ministry of Cultural Education, at the universities, and also in the business community. There always seems to be either too many or far too less of skilled ICT people. And it is the case also today. So I guess we're about ready to get started, so I can stop talking nonsense. So it is my pleasure to introduce the next session about industry meeting academia, new ways of operation for industry-university collaboration and angles towards ICT education and new forms and ideas in education. The first speaker is Rasmus Roiha. Welcome, Rasmus.
Thanks.
Rasmus is the Managing Director of Finnish Software Entrepreneurs Association. You have been involved in among other things, among trying to predict and handle the ever-increasing demand for talented and skillful people in modern technology, ICT and related stuff. But without further talk, so let's hear what you have to say today. Thank you. Welcome back.
All right. Hello, hi. It's a horrible situation to be speaking after a great person like David Levi. He had much more of an interesting topic. I think most of you are thinking about sex with intelligent vacuum cleaners by now. And we have to come back to planet Earth for a moment and think about, studies and education, workplaces, and how we get our industry and our economics rolling. That's what I'm more or less here to speak about today. David did not need to be presented very much. He's world known, I'm not. So a few words why you should listen and understand and believe in what I say. I've been an entrepreneur in the software industry since 1998. I founded 3 companies myself, built them, internationalized them, some successful, some very unsuccessful, used a lot of venture capital money, and it's been a very interesting 20 years trip during my industry time in the software industry. For the last 5 years, I've been running the Finnish Software Entrepreneurs Association. It's called in Finnish the Ohjelmistoyrittäjät. It has been a great privilege for me to be in such a place that I could meet and see lots of software entrepreneurs, understand where the industry is going, and I meet typically in a typical year I meet 200 CEOs of this industry and get feedback, get ideas, get a pulse on where things are going. But not only that, I have to rely on academia also, and today I'm gonna go through and discuss about two studies. One is a study done by the University of Jyväskylä, where Mikko Rönkkö, formerly also been actually in the University of Turku, I just heard, doing the first of these studies, went over to Aalto and now he's in Jyväskylä, but he's been doing the software industry survey for a long time. But nowadays it's in Jyväskylä yliopisto with Eetu Luoma, and then I'm going to go through a few points from our own survey that has been answered by 180 CEOs of our industry. As said, Jyväskylä University has been working with us on the software industry survey 2017. We launched and published this in December, so we can say it's fairly accurate and fairly new, fresh. I'm going to show a few statistics. One of the interesting points is that the software and IT services industry has been growing a lot during the last 10 years. It is a very nice kind of 9% on average year-on-year growth, aggregated growth per year. But what it does not tell is the story that actually this is the actual growth of the industry, the dotted line, and all the rest is what Supercell did to our industry. So it's kind of, we are in a situation that like we had with Finland many years ago. We had our gross national domestic production with and without Nokia. So in our industry we have it with and without Supercell. Last year, or 2016, was not the growth year for Supercell, as it stayed quite stabilized on 2 billion euro revenue. Quite nice figure that also. And actually the rest of the industry grew more than the whole pie with Supercell. but we've been a growth industry now for the last 20 years. Who is generating growth? Small companies are generating, during the last 10 years, they have generated approximately €1 billion of revenue. And then the companies that are, we call the smaller part of the small and medium-sized companies, the 10 to 50-person companies, they have generated a 700 million new revenue during that time. And then we have the big companies, bigger than 50% companies, they have generated, again, an extra billion in revenue. And this is now without Supercell. And that blip there is if you put the same statistics with Supercell. So we would have a very nice trajectory there. But as this is the 2 billion that Supercell has made into our economy during the last, basically in the last 5 years. Some results in a nutshell. I'll go a few slides backwards and I'll just check what the N is. There was close to 500 companies answering to this survey, 486. And they were asked that if the skies would open and you would have these different expertises that you're looking for, you would have them available. Which ones would you recruit right now? Whom would you sign your employee agreement with now? And they were categorized as novice, that means under 5 years of expertise in the area, and over 5 years of expertise in the area. So an expert in one way. As you can see from the results, 50% of all those that would be employed today immediately are software developers. So this part, those 3 lines, are software development functionalities, server-side, front-end applications, and mobile. And then it means that the rest half of them are from areas that are not specifically coding. They might be business analytics, consultants. You can be the architects saying that this is the way, should be sales and technical support persons and so on. Oh, by the way, I have done the translation myself. This is only in Finnish, available from Jyväskylä University. So if there's some incorrectness here, it's not due to Eetu or Mikko Rönkkö. They are great scientists, but they provided me it only in Finnish, so the translation is mine. All in all, from the close to 500 answers from companies, they then extrapolated an estimate for the industry. And the Jyväskylä University extrapolation is approximately 8,000 vacant places that would be signed now if there would be this kind of right kind of skills and talent available for these companies. That's a lot. 8,000 new employees. Then there always comes the question, but don't we have unemployed engineers in Finland? I talked with the chairman of Insinööriliitto, Samu, 2 days ago, and he said there's 1,300 engineers in Finland that are unemployed still. But even if every single unemployed engineer in Finland would be employed today, we're still having a lack or a gap of close to 7,000 new employees. That's a huge amount of people and skill. And this, what it practically does, that our industry does not evolve as fast as it could. It means practically that there are areas like health technology, wellness technologies, that could go further. We could have quicker advantages of technology. We could have new kind of ways of living longer or more healthier. That is not happening today because we don't have the software engineers to work with that. Naturally, on the other hand, it's not only our industry. I'll come to that later, but I want you to keep in mind this 8,000 is only in the software industry. Then we have all the other industries that our digitalization is going through. We have the banking sector, we have the finance sector, we have industry companies. As we're now in Turku, you have to notice companies like Rolls-Royce that is working with Turku University and building autonomous ships. That's not software industry, that's shipbuilding industry, at least for PRH, who gives these qualifications and statistics. From the questionnaire, 72% of the answers had to do with software development skills and talents. But they are very versatile. It's not one single skill that is needed, not one single technology that is dominant in our industry at the moment. I'm sorry these are in Finnish, most of them, but they are quite international language. So it's very versatile, the whole spectrum of what kind of expertise, what kind of skill and talent companies are looking for at the moment. Also, on top of basic software engineering, there are 3 areas that got several mentions: artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data analytics. And actually those 3 could be combined. There are many things that combine these 3 things, although they are separately mentioned. One of the points is also that in an industry that we have approximately 54,000 software developers in our industry, the current new need is also not only new pairs of hands, it's new skill sets. Skill sets that we don't have yet, or we have very little of. And this is where education and academia plays a very, very significant role. So what we are doing today is in the industry is here. And we have a skill set that we're looking for in the thousands. We can argue it's 7,000 or 8,000 or 6,000, or Mika Helenius from Tivia, he's always shouting that it's 15,000. Whatever the figure is, it's new talent, people, not still in robotics, I'm sorry, we'll still need people doing this, and it's also new talent. So pairs of hands and new thinking, new parts. That is what this Eetu and Mikko Rönkö from Jyväskylä University try to do with these circles too. In the questionnaire, we also asked a little bit about, or they asked, what kind of problems do you occur? I'm sorry, these answers are finished. It comes directly from their statistics. I could not overwrite them in English. So it comes from the Excel or whatever SPSS program they're using. But they're asking, do you agree? I strongly disagree, red, strong disagree, green, I agree. On a few questions. We have a problem sticking with our current employees. No, it's not a problem. Current employees stay well with their companies. Why? They are treated very well. They get high salaries. They get to do interesting jobs. They stick well with companies. Is it a problem that the salaries have gone up quite a lot, more than on average? On average, the salaries in Finland have gone up a few percentage per year. Our industry, it's not untypical that the person can get 5 to 10% every year, year on year, cumulatively. So it's a problem? Not really yet. We're still in a situation that the salaries are not yet a problem. It's too expensive to recruit experts. Not really yet a problem. We can't hire people that don't have expertise, was the next question. Actually, many companies do hire people on trainee programs and so on. People that are not yet fully educated. They have not done their studies to the end, but they work part-time. They work summertime. They work on projects, school projects and so on. These people already are hired in. But then we come to the parts that they say that we have problems. And it's where it's finding enough new talent. Yes, this was companies thought that they are, over half said that we agree or agree heavily on this. If we don't find talent from Finland, and we don't have enough, where do you go? You start to look abroad. And the next set of questions, this is the last set of questions, I promise you, was that is it a problem? Do you have problems to hire people from abroad? Do you have problems finding people from abroad? Are there salary requests too high when they come from other countries to Finland? And all of these questions, these entrepreneurs and software companies answered no, 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 and no for most parts. So most companies are looking abroad, they're looking for talent. The salaries from people that are coming from abroad is not a problem. These are kind of good news for us that our industry is doing so well and software companies are doing so well that they are hiring basically anybody, from young to old, from new talent to old knowledge, from abroad to local. Some conclusions. The industry grows well. I'm happy to be in an industry that grows well, and I hope most of you have the possibility to be a part of it at some point, somehow. Willingness to go abroad from Finland, to expand, the willingness to take more risk has increased during the 10 years. Mikko and Eetu have done this study. There's a dire need for skilled software employees, up to thousands, and they don't find enough new workers at the moment. These are the quick conclusions from that. We did our own survey also. We asked a little bit similar questions, but from a different point of view, a little bit earlier. We had 180 entrepreneurs, CEOs answering this one. We asked them, during the next 6 months, how does your business look? 90% of the CEOs think that their business is going to be increasing, their revenue is going to be increasing during the next 6 months. Not 2 years, not 3 years, but in a short term. 75% said that they are going to have more people employed during the next 6 months if they just can't find the right kind of people. We can't find enough capable software programmers from Finland. Well, we established that already earlier. Yes, they are having a problem finding them. There's actually one company that is from Turku called Lyyti. They said they don't have any problems, but the rest of them said that they have problems finding the right kind of talent. The Lyyti guys are doing something very well. But this is the only part that were not, everybody was not on the same page and having the same opinion. This was totally divided. Disagreed and fully agreed. We are looking for programmers also from abroad. And this has to do with that still many of the Finnish software companies work with Finnish customers. The Finnish customers don't have a very big willingness to have software developers that are not talking in their language. You can't talk about the specifications and new opportunities there, or what findings they did and how should we develop it further and so on their native language. So this is still, it's not the software companies, but the software companies' customers that are the biggest blocker there. We also asked about the working language. Lord and behold, 5 years ago we asked the same question. 20% said that we have English as a language in our company. Now only Finnish is 20%. So 80% is something else that only Finnish. It's Finnish and English, only English, and then we have this other. This other is Svenska. Svenska or Engelska. It has to do with Pohjanmaa there. Vaasa. 60% of companies in our industry already have foreign people working, so they have already taken the first step that they have the first employee who's non-Finnish, not speaking Finnish as a native language, and they have to adopt to this. So our industry is also becoming international from inside. And this is very good news. These I didn't interpret in English, I'm sorry, but basically it's telling stories. These are companies and people, CEOs of companies telling how does it affect your business when you don't find enough skilled, talented employees. And they are very interesting to read. Most of them say that we have lots of projects, lots of customers that we have to say that we can't supply to you. We can't take your order. We can't do that development you're hoping for and you're willing to pay for because we're out of manpower. And I don't mean manpower like only men, but we only have 20% women, so it's like human power. I'm not going to go through all of them. Then I have 10 slides of these. They're very interesting to read, but I would like to point out, as I am Turku, that Turku company, Lyyti, Petri Holmeen, founder, ei tällä hetkellä mitenkään vaikuta. So he finds new talent enough from the Turku economical area. Most of them don't. And it slows down the growth rate. It slows down the growth rate. All right, I'm going to just quick scroll these. Kauppalehti, Optio, one of the big business magazines, had a long article last week, and they said that there are so many ways that the recruitment to the industry and the competition for great talent and skill is ongoing. It's everything from lazy boys development areas to you have a budget of going abroad to seminars to keep up your skill set. And congratulations, if you're in the industry, you are in the most wanted industry, most wanted employee, in Finland at the moment. But then we get to this what to do part. Now we've got the big picture, hopefully. This is where we are. There are three things that we have identified that we should work with. One is girls and women. We are an industry that only has 20% women in our workforce, and of those women, actually only half work with software development. That's 10%. And still, over 50% of the people who use software in healthcare, in technology companies, in industries are women. Why? I have read now 200 stories of women who have written to us when we are having a Mimmit Kooda event, Women Coders event, and I asked them, tell your story, why you are not in the industry. There are women who are not in the industry, they are not programmers, but they are interested to be. Most of the stories tell about the lack of support. They were never supported at school because they were girls, not boys. They're opinto-ohjaaja. What's that in English?
Study counselor.
Study counselor. The study counselors never supported women with good mathematical skills. They said, have you thought about becoming a nurse or a doctor? You never thought of supporting them into technology and software. And this has been ongoing in Finland during my lifetime, at least. I'm 41. And I think many of the study counselors, the opinto-ohjaaja, the opona, they are still at the same schools. We should change them probably at some point. But this is something that is really a big issue. Women are not supported.
Next year to study counselors.
Other thing is that girls. How many? Well, there's very young people also, but there's also adults here. I can see. I mean, later stage adults. How many of you have children who are in the audience now? Yeah, some of you. Good. Majority of you. How many have a girl? You know that the biggest influencer in a girl's world, what they start to study and what they are doing, are their parents. And guess which one of the parents is a bigger role model for girls? No, it's not fathers. I'm sorry. It's mothers. Mothers' support to their daughters is the biggest single factor. And when Microsoft launched a big study, it's called a STEM study, Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics. 27,000 girls were interviewed around the world. Guess which countries are the most lazy to support their girls towards STEM areas, these mathematics, luonnontieteelliset areas. Is it Portugal? Is it Brazil? Finland, Sweden, and Norway. We are the most lazy in supporting our girls there. And we are also the most, I think, wealthy and welfare states and so on. So we have a little bit this that in many other countries they see this, that this is the way we have to support our kids because they have to support us when we are old. They don't have the pension system. Well, our pension system, let us go into that. They don't have good pension system, so on. So they have to support their girls and boys into industries where they can support them when they are old. We don't have that, so we haven't done this work. Okay, that's of girls and women. I'm very passionate about this, and I think that we are missing lots and lots of good brain power in our industry if we don't support girls and women to this industry. Good. Then to education. We educate approximately 1,000 software skilled persons per year. It's software engineering, it's software science, it's different levels from ammattikorkea to opisto and korkeakoulu and university. Different levels, bachelors and so on. That's 1,000 a year approximately. Our need is increasing by 2,000 a year, and it might increase more in the future. So the gap of whatever Jyväskylä University guys say it's 8,000 is the gap today. It will increase by 1,000 each year if we don't increase our education in these areas. I hope there will be enough people who are interested in this area because the salaries are good. The companies are like the great place to work companies. They're mostly software companies in Finland, if you look at those lists the last 5 years. So we have to double very quickly our starting positions and triple them after that. I'm sorry to say this is, or else most of the jobs will be coming from abroad. Thirdly, we have to retrain and upgrade our qualifications. If you are a specialist who have been doing, I'm not going to say Nokia, but in Nokia, some development for 15 years, a specific industry or a specific technology, you can't only fixate to one thing. You have to have a broader spectrum of knowledge because technology goes forward. Something that's dominant today might be obsolete tomorrow. And this is a problem. And this must come from within. And we have different kind of education systems, but these people are, when they're in the business and life, they are not anymore touched so much by schools and universities and so on. It must come from inside. And inner motivation plays a very big role to keep up your know-how, that it's what we call markkinalähtöistä, market ready, that people are willing to pay for that know-how that you have. These are the 3 main points that I hope that we could change in Finland, and we could change them fast. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Rasmus. I think we have time for 1, 2 short questions. We have other talk which is highly related here. This was the demand by the industry, and then we have the supply by the government sort of approach to the same topic, so we can have a discussion after the other talk. But yes, now direct question to Rasmus, please.
What to do, and what does your company do with the slogan that things are invented and developed in this country but never exploited fully commercially?
That is, yeah. Yeah, it has to do with risk taking. Most entrepreneurs work on something, develop it forward, they might use 10, 15 years. And at that point, the question is, they should still use next 10 or 15 years of really expanding it abroad internationally. And it is an increased risk taking on top of that. If you're a first-time entrepreneur, it's your first company, and you think about, I have two options. I can sell the company now, get 50, 60 million, for instance, as Blanco did and Kim Väisänen and so on. Or then I'll try to take it international and build it to $1 billion business. This is kind of you're pondering upon these choices. One will take an extra 15, 20 years of your lifetime, and it might go bust. You have nothing to leave your kids. Or you take a 20 million now or 50 million now, my kids are set, even my grandkids are set for life. So what happens is that the first company is often sold quite early up. And the exploitation of the great invention goes to somebody else. But these guys and girls that have set up these companies, if they start the second company, they're already set. And they can go as far as they want, because you don't have the risk factor that my kids will go, without getting any inheritance. So what we need is serial entrepreneurs. We need people who build not only one company, but two companies or three companies, because then they have the guts to take it to the end.
Okay, let's get a series of 3 questions. You, and you.
Could you mention some innovations done by your member companies?
Innovations? Well, very, very broad question there. If you think about somebody like Risto Siilasmaa, who was one of the founders of our association, his Data Fellows company started building security software.
It bought licensed its software from Iceland.
Yes, they started on with that, but they have developed.
Innovation. Next one.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the persons from Skepticism ry, Lauri Grön, in the house.
Not a member.
And we have met many times with Lauri during these years. Did we have other questions?
Yes, the problem with your company, member companies, is that they are doing tailored software and competing with others. So it's misuse of manpower. Not so many products, no innovations. So we have too many software companies and too many people doing work on those companies.
And still there is the demand for it. I will answer like David Levi answered to you. You have the right for your opinion. And there was the next gentleman.
On the next row, please. Yeah. You.
My name is José Otávio from Brazil.
Hello, José.
Brazil and Finland is opposite. Finland increased 10% in industry. Brazil decreased 10%. We have more than 50% of women and students from Brazil in this area. Here, a big problem. What's the plan of Finland to resolve this, or in future, Finland decreased in technology and had a big depression because this is a big problem. What's the plan of education and the industry to resolve this big problem?
I missed the big problem, sorry.
The big problem is in future, we have no talent, no persons. If more and more increase, 10%, and you have the limit of paid salaries, and no people, and you have a big problem.
Yeah.
And no competition in world in 4 years. And what this problem is a big problem.
Yeah.
Or no?
Yeah, it is a big problem, but one thing that many researchers say that technology is in that way good that when it goes further and we have technological advantage, most of, if you think about human power and how much you need it and what you have to pay for salaries, before we get to robotics, we get to something that is, I would say, software robotics. So one person and the output that one person gets of doing their work is much higher in the technology field now than it was 5 years ago, because we have help from software that does when we, how could I explain it? We have help from software when we develop software. And the more our technology advantages goes further, we have better software that helps us more. So actually the human side is needed to tell that this is what I have been thinking that we're doing, and the software is helping us in the development. So at some point we will have probably not self-sufficient software building software, but the human capacity that one person output is much bigger than today 10 people are doing when they're developing.
But do you need in future 10 people to learn to learn the software in artificial intelligence?
At the moment we need people to teach artificial intelligence, but going further we don't need people. We have produced enough material in the world today that they can, just that we get the material, access to the material, that they start to learn themselves. Actually, I just met at the Turku University, and Timo Vasankari can tell the NLP science department, and they are actually using the material that is already available. So you don't teach them, you just tell them where to go and look for information.
Okay, let's take the last question there. Thank you.
Yes, what do you think about the possibilities of telecommuting?
Telecommuting?
Yeah. Can people use that in your business or work from home, for example?
I think already in our industry, approximately 20-30 people percent of people already work every day telecommuting. I mean, they don't go to an office. I think most companies in their company policy have today in the software industry that they have certain days that people are required to meet other people in offices, but they work what do you call it, telecommuting, etänä, from homes or wherever they are, because it's a misuse of time to transport yourself to an office to make software if you want a quiet and peaceful place. You could have, I think the future is going to be very much in Finland also, where we have long distances, especially when you go to Jyväskylä, Tampere, go out there, they have long distances. So they are going to have these mini hubs where you can go and work in peace and quiet. They might be 2-person, 5-person hubs. Small spaces, they're not very expensive, they're not one single company's places, and you only meet your colleagues, let's say 2 times a week. You have like an on-site. A little bit like education is today. Some of it goes to the net, and you're working over the internet, you're studying, and then you have those days that you're meeting the professor and you have face-to-face time. I think it will be very similar in the industry and working environment in the future. And already today it is.
Thank you, Rasmus. I
think
we need to thank you again. So.
Thank you.
You heard about the demand is growing for software industry. Fortunately, it's also the kind of business that can scale up using artificial intelligence, but then again, that calls for even more education in the field. The next talk, it says in the program that we have Permanent Secretary Anita Lehikoinen. Unfortunately, Anita could not make it today. There was a last-minute change in the schedule. Ilkka, please come forward. We have Ilkka Turunen from the ministry. Ilkka has been around and knows things, so I don't think we don't miss Anita that much. So welcome.
Thank you. Yes. Okay. Yeah. As was mentioned, due to her very urgent responsibilities, Anita could not attend that meeting, but I can convince you that this is a very topical theme in the ministry, and we are very committed to excel in this area. I don't mean only robotics or artificial intelligence, but how to exploit the utilization, digitalization. So this is very timely. And perhaps one reason why Anita sent me here was that she knows that I'm a very passionate reader of history of robotics and history of artificial intelligence. And my latest found was that actually they were discussing in United States the same topics during the President Johnson's regime, government, and during already in Eisenhower government, there was a similar themes, whether the robots will come and destroy the works, and what will happen to human-robotics relations. So that has been on the agenda 70 years. In I will follow. I made only one question to Anita. Give me one concept or give me one word that I should stress there. And she said leadership. And I asked why. Because the makers are there. It's now their opportunity to seize the day and do the things. So that, therefore, it was the leadership. My own conception, my own approach is more on the change of a mindset in the university community. Because, as was mentioned, I've been around since 1975 when I became a research assistant in the Academy of Finland. And this is the second time during my career when I really feel that there is a change in the mindset. And in my thinking, I mean universities, you yourself, is that there is a thinking that we produce results and solutions, competence-based, research-based solution to global problems. Because this is something which we want to contribute. Internationalization is not anymore only the mobility of students, mobility of researchers. It is that we want to contribute in solving global problems. And that is something I have. This is my interpretation. This is not Anita's. But I will follow Anita's presentation, and I try to do my best. I try to understand. Okay, this is the normal story. We are high ranking in different kinds of evaluation and list. You know that we have one of the best education system, best education, basic education. We have best press freedom. Now we are, if my memory serves me well, number 2. We have a very safe state. We have social cohesion. We have best public administration, etc., etc. And also on the European Union Innovation Scoreboard, Finland belongs to the innovation leaders. And once again, our basic strength is, interestingly, it's finance and support, meaning how must we invest in R&D activities. So we have a good framework for utilizing and exploiting our human capital. And as you know, Finland was one of the first countries that thought that it's a question about human capital as a whole, how to maintain and exploit the human capital, the whole population. And also, if we look closer, the latest reviews or studies on Finnish position in international comparison in the areas of artificial intelligence, patents, and Finland seems to do relatively well. And if you look at the statistics on cloud computing, for example, Finnish businesses and public sector is number 1 compared to some among OECD countries. So this is something what we have to stress, that there are ecosystem for exploiting our capacities. I mean, both human capital and industry. So this is something which is important to note. And this is this is one of the figures based on a study of Richard Baldwin, and the main message in those figures is that if you look at the industrial history and the breakdown of the resources and the production, total production in global scale, the position of the richest countries is now the same as it used to be in the beginning of the 19th century. And there has been a total change in the global breakdown of the wealth, because this is the most dramatic change in the industrial history, and that happened only during 2 decades. And that relates to the competition of talent. So that there is a lot of talent, and how we can improve our ecosystem to attract the talent. It's not only a question of mismatch, it's how we contribute in local value chains and how we can attract the best brains, not only the foreigners, but also our own talents, because we have a lot of potential here. And this has been one of the background information when you drafted the university vision. And this is actually the other part of it, is a human dimension of the same story. If you look at the number of graduates, higher education graduates in young age cohorts, you easily see that there will be a very rapid change also in this sphere, because the importance and the role of the students from China, from other emerging economies is increasing rapidly. So this is the environment where we have to produce welfare and growth. And I have seen this figure many times because it's so, it speaks us very loudly that if you look at the number of higher education students in science, technology, engineering, and maths, they are very rapidly increasing. If you look at Finland, the breakdown is in that sense favorable to Finland. If you look at the higher education degree holders or students, Finland is one of the leading countries as regards STEM higher education degrees. But still, there seems to be, as I suppose, stressed in the earlier presentation, that there is a demand to those skills. I skip those. This is actually from the, if my memory serves me well again, it's from the Research and Innovation Council report or the roadmap for the future. And this stresses the same topics I mentioned earlier, that in the future, the players in the field in the innovation policy, they should trust themselves, they should lead the direction of Finnish innovation and research policy, and also Finnish policy field in general, because there was a time when it was thought that we were in the midst of lost decade because of the recession, and where Finland was losing its position as one of the leading innovation countries. But there was actually very rapid change in the mindset because of the excelling economy. I should have some of the slides there on that topic, but somehow I could not find them. Yeah, because this is not the presentation what I actually sent, but anyway. Can you fix it? Because in the other presentation there is figures on the talent and competition and skills, and that relates much better to your presentation. This is something they sent a presentation, and this seems to be some old.
This is the 1 cent, only 1 cent.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry for that.
Okay, but anyway, I try to follow that, and then I give my notes. Okay. Because actually, in the presentation, there was discussion on after that on what kind of skills are needed in future. And first, there was two figures on the economic impact of artificial intelligence. Very recent study, which clearly shows that Finland is one of the countries that will really benefit if we can exploit and use the artificial intelligence capacity, what we already have. There's an estimation that artificial intelligence has a potential to double annual economic growth rates in the countries that use the capacity, existing capacity. And Finland is the second country only after the United States. And the growth rate would be 4.1%. And that is promising. And the other figure was that if you look at the increase in labor productivity in artificial intelligence, that will increase till 2035, 36%. And once again, Finland is second in the scale in those countries that were involved in that study. It was 15 countries. Sweden was number 1, Finland was number 2. So this is important. We have the potential also in this field. And that something which is missing but follows here in the printed form is that we also have to notice that what is going on in our innovation economy and in our education and innovation system. We are reforming our early childhood education. We have a reform of basic education. There will be a reform for upper secondary general education. We have a new university vision. This is a total change compared to the situation when the research team from OECD came to Finland and said to us that we don't see any movement, you have lost your grip, etc., etc. And now we see the change. And this is because the universities, because of the research institutions, a new confidence of young generation. That is my interpretation. Because our system has been very much top-down. It's driven by proposals from the public sector, from the ministry, and now it's time for you to take the lead and use the capacity that already is there.
Don't worry.
What?
We will, don't worry.
Okay, yeah, I try to follow. And as regards the skills, a couple of years ago I started to scrutinize how the national core curriculums change in different countries. At the beginning, I thought that I should look at Singapore, South Korea, the usual suspect, New Zealand, Canada. But then I came back to Finland and I started to scrutinize our own national core curriculum. And I noticed that actually they fit very well in some sense. I mean, in the national core curriculum, basic education and upper secondary education. Because if I look, the very fresh new report by World Economic Forum, what they say that there should be foundational literacies and competencies and character qualities, and what are the skills needed: literacy, numeracy, scientific literacy, information and communication, technology literacy, financial literacy, cultural and civic literacy, and there, of course, the key area is the critical thinking and problem solving, and communication and collaboration, etc., etc. We can find all those from the national core curriculum, because it's not only that you should have a specific skill that fits to the existing needs. It is something how you learn to learn. What is your capacity? What is your person, your character? Because something that is common to different kind of catalogs, different OECD, EU, and the big international think tanks, they have tried to analyze what are the core skills. Everywhere I can find that it is what was mentioned earlier today. It is how to be a human being. They are the original good life and understanding where I am, what I should do, and they call it meta-learning. How should I behave here? For myself, I should look at the watch and this is meta-learning. I should take in the account that you are living into the next step. But anyway, this is the character, knowledge and skills, they are the combination, and I think that it's not only specific skills related to ICT, for example. And then to the part of the old presentation, actually what is happening here, I'm very happy that National Research and Innovation Council, together, it's a governmental level roadmap, it covers the key areas. Now the competence and education, the good basis for the welfare and growth is there. Ensuring competence-based. because we had a week ago a government strategic session on artificial intelligence and knowledge policy, and one of the key measures from that session was that Prime Minister, when he summarized the discussion that was actually 6 hours discussion on artificial intelligence, was that it's not only the mismatch that are seen now in the labor market. That is real, and it's the task of the Ministry of Education and Culture to tackle that. But you have to remember that there are more than 1 million Finnish citizens who do not have required basic skills to be able to do their daily work, or who are not able to upskill their skills in the future. So it's not only the specific artificial intelligence or robotic related skills, it is the human capital existing in Finland, how to retrain, how to make lifelong learning a reality. And therefore I think that this is a good approach starting from, and this is something you know because you've been involved with this strategy. And once again, I would say that the main targets and objectives there, for example, that over 50% of all young people would complete their higher education degrees, very ambitious if you look at the money available and the investment, but that is a very rational target because Finland used to be #1 in terms of higher education degrees in a young age cohort. It was 30 to 34 years of age in year 1991. Korea was #2. Now Finland is among OECD countries #22. So there is a lot room for improvement, and therefore this is a very rational and reasonable target. And as regards the research and innovation on R&D target, which is public and private together, it is 4%. Someone commented already from my network from the United States and some other countries that why 4%? Why not 8 or 6? If you compare Finland to Massachusetts or some states in the United States, you should, instead of comparing Finland to nation state, compare some areas where they really investment human capital and R&D. But anyway, I'm very happy that, but also the wording in that new strategy is not that, I know that we somehow we're not at the level of a good way to have an impact to politicians when we last time drafted similar strategies, because we stressed that we have a lot of problems, we have cracks in knowledge and education base. Now this is something that what we can do, what we can produce, how we can serve, what can we serve, or what kind of services we are able to develop. And the wording is important for me. I see that there has been a change in the mindset, but I think that I have used all the time available for me. Thank you very much. I'm sorry about the some imbalance in the presentation, because there was my words and there was words by permanent secretary.
They match so perfectly together. Thank you. Very passionate talk. I wish more people at the government were as enthusiastic about their work than you. Okay, so thank you, Jukka. A few questions directly. Carl.
Yes, thank you very much. It was very, as usual, very good. The only thing which I try to understand, I very much agree what you are saying, but then I had to ask that, how do you see the vision and the policy you are now proposing is related to the very strong profilating policy or present policy of
flagship or what kind of mean?
Well, basically the whole profiling idea, maybe including flagship or but more like at the more basic level of university?
This is relevant because there always seemed to be a tension. That is something that bothered me when I was reading the evaluation by the OECD review team of our innovation system, because there was, on the one hand, there was that there should be a lot of freedom for research community or to community of innovators, not only research, so that it's not that you can name the areas or mention the areas where you should excel, because there is always a rapid change. But on the other hand, as a small country, you have always shortage of researchers. If you can find something that really is based on your expertise, where you really are good and where you are close to the top. So it's always a very difficult combination, but I understand what you mean, because it always bothers me too, because we have SOCs. We have had a different program for investing areas what we are thinking that it will be for the future. But then there will be 2 or 3 steps back and rethinking. So, but I don't have a good answer to that, but I think that all the small countries have to live with that. That's my honest answer. We have to live with that problem.
Other questions? Now, of course, please.
Concerning that over 50% of all young people complete a higher education degree, have you ever heard of a Gaussian curve? Half of the people have IQ below 100, and a lot of people have IQ 101. So that means only way to do that is to reduce the quality of higher education.
You should read the report of the Evaluation Council of the Economic Policy, because they have more dramatic figures for you, because it clearly shows that the IQ is going down. It's not only what you said. But I think that this is something what I have learned from the brain research, that brain is very flexible, and what I've learned, where we can improve, that teach and learn the right things at the right time. There's a lot of potential. This IQ question has been there for more than 100 years, and if you look at what is happening everywhere in the world, it is still better to have a higher educational attainment level. That relates to the health, to the welfare, to the participation, the inclusion. Everything that relates to the good life it's related to educational attainment level. So that's very reasonable. IQ has nothing to do with that. You should read the new papers instead of those 100-year-old papers.
Reading is good. Other questions? Okay, please.
Is the protectionism in the world increasing?
And that's my understanding. There are tendencies that worries us. It's not only the protectionism, but what happens in the political field too. What kind of attitudes? Some attitudes detrimental to learning. We know what is happening. There is a new index of democracy, and we see that during the last 4 years, it's the first time since the Second World War when we see that the commitments to democracy is going down now everywhere in the world. So protectionism is partly related to the change in the attitudes and atmosphere in the world, at the world level.
Okay. I think I would like to have a question still. I mean, you mentioned that the government policy has been very much oriented like top-down initiatives, and you mentioned that the universities, there's been a change in the mindset of the youth.
Everywhere, not only in the universities.
No, but in the youth, among the youth.
Yeah.
Yes, and the universities should be more initiative and innovative.
Yeah,
So quite frankly, why do you still regulate the number of degrees and the number of students so strongly? Why don't let the market to take care of the quantity issue? Only regulate the quality.
That's relevant question because I think that we are starting. This is not the official opinion of the ministry, but I think that I somehow represent the thinking behind it. Because now we are looking. I think that part of the vision work there will be whether there should more general decrease. This is related to decrease structure, but also that we call them what is this? Mini decrease or shorter decrease combination where you can combine learning or studying in university, higher education and work, which will be, but that requires new structure for financing the studies, because what is now missing is that we don't have a stipendium or scholarship or a personal account that guarantees that there is some part of it is your individual responsibility, part is the public responsibility, part is the responsibility of the companies. We don't have that kind of system. That is not direct answer to you, but this is answer to the question that we should take very seriously the lifelong learning and continuous improvement of the competence. But that's true, because I think that the reason for that is not that we are stupid bureaucrats in the ministry, which is partly true, but the main reason is that our system has been based on calculation, anticipation and forecasting the labor market needs. And I think that there's a typical Finnish approach that we should take responsibility of those who enter into labor market. And therefore there is always, should we start medicine in the city C, or should we start engineering education? I think that it was actually very good answer to this type of question, how the universities together try to solve the shortage of engineering in certain part of Finland. But that's very relevant, but how to solve it so that we take into account the labor market needs as far we can know them. Because it's more difficult to know because of the volatility of labor market. So therefore I stress the general intelligence and general competence and skills.
Yes, I agree.
But may I still, the one thing that when I meant that it has been a top-down, it's partly because there is expectation that there will be initiative from the ministry, and we count on that there will be proposal. So that it's not only that it is Finnish tradition that the citizens they trust on the public sector, they trust on what we do in the government. So this is something that we both have to rethink the idea how it really works.
Not anymore.
Okay.
But maybe just one detail concerning this is that if you look now this present how you say the distribution of different subjects, which what we have, there is one very clear difference from all other science areas, and that's the technology. In technology, you are teaching very strictly different. If I remember correctly, there are 13 different study programs. Yeah. Whereas in other fields, for instance, in the whole area of natural sciences, we have only 6. So, or 5. And in medicine, we have 1 out of 2, including dentistry. And this is what wonders me very much, that how on earth, if we can take the whole from the universe to the nanotechnology in 5 different areas, why we need in technology 13 different areas?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think that is a similar question when we were reforming the upper secondary vocational education. I found out that there were actually 370 professions that we tried to relate to the substance of the degree programs. So that was very complicated system, because it was thought that there are labor market needs that are defined by the profession, existing professions. Perhaps that you have something in the field of technology that you beforehand know what kind of professions are there available, even though it's not true anymore.
Exactly, not anymore.
Yeah.
last question again for you.
Yeah, thank you. I became very sad when I read about this telecommunication education estimation. How it was so much behind the Nokia progress and then the decline. Can it be predicted more carefully that how many students need to be in this, for example, telecommunication business in Finland?
We are actually reforming now the forecasting anticipation system, and what will be the change would be that it will be more towards a qualitative instead of quantitative anticipation. And what we should really do and what we could do in Finland, use big data in there. Because we have a lot of information about the students, how they proceed and what kind of skills and competencies they have. And we have a similar knowledge if you can combine different sources of what is happening in the labor market. And that we should use the capacity what we have in order to be better in anticipation the labor market needs. But you never can build a system that really gives you a picture that if you have a degree in some certain area, you will, with that degree, survive in the labor market till the end of your labor market career. Then there must be retraining and etc.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's thank Ilkka again. Okay, thank you very much for sharing this session. And then we go to the panel, which will be chaired by Prof. Maija. Over to you.
Okay. Don't go, the fun starts. This is quite surprising since I had no idea who is going to be here for the panel discussion, but it looks very, very promising, so thank you all for being here. My name is Maija Peltola. I'm a new member of staff at the Department of Future Technologies, but otherwise I'm quite old. Therefore I've been here for 20 years already, but we shifted just at the beginning of January from the humanities, so we are feeling very excited about all this, and it's lovely to be here to meet all of you. We already know most of you, well, less than most, I suppose, but we already know some of you. So the ones who presented already today need no introductions, and others may need them not that much either, but let's do it anyways. Just a couple of words, name and something.
Yes, so I'm Tero Koivisto, Chief Scientific Officer from Precordior. Precordior is a university spin-off working on the field of cardiac monitoring.
Okay, thank you, welcome. You, we already know.
Kalervo Väänänen, Rector, University of Turku.
Sayed Kakahel. I'm a PhD student and have a very recent journey to research.
Okay, yes. Thank you all for being here once again. This is rather exciting because I was thinking of something that we could talk about together after the discussions, and then I realized that we've talked about prostitution, sexy robots, we talk about the industry growth, we've talked about legal issues, and we have talked about the problems of educating in a wise way in the wise fields in Finland as a whole. We talked about global issues, very detailed issues. I have absolutely no idea what the common ground is, but I suppose it may be the things that we do at the multidisciplinary university such as ours, the things we can do at this particular Department of Future Technologies, and what we can all do for humanity as a whole, and what we can do locally in small little things, like educating right amount of people in right fields. But just to warm you up a little bit, this is like kindergarten stuff, but let's pretend for a little while, and let's pretend that you are now at around the age of 18, 19, and you are thinking of where to go and what to study. Of course, you would all take the University of Turku, that's natural. But otherwise, what field and why? And you may think about the global issues and solving them, be a true lifesaver for the whole universe. Or you can think very practically about getting a job and a good paycheck, whatever you feel like it. But please, what would you do? Where would you study? What would you study and why? And I shall be calling you by the first name because we're such good friends, but you may address me as esteemed chair. There you go. But Tero, there you go.
I'm quite lazy, so I'm guessing that something which is close and then something which is probably easy.
Oh, close and easy.
Yes.
Very high standards.
Yes.
And the reasoning behind was laziness.
Yeah, probably. I'm guessing.
Oh, good. We'll get along.
Go very far. Yeah.
What about you, David?
Well, there are two areas that I would consider to be very interesting if I had the great fortune to be 18 or 19. One of them is a subject I touched on earlier today, which is the legal aspects of the coming plethora of robots in the world. I think that lawmakers need to do a huge amount of work to prepare society with new laws to take care of the changes in society brought about by robots. So one of the things that I would seriously consider doing is becoming a lawyer. I'd be a law student, and I'd want to specialize in that field, because not only is there a lot of work for lawmakers, but imagine how much work there'll be for lawyers, and lawyers charge a huge amount of money. So I think that would be a very interesting field. The other field I would consider going into, which I think is incredibly important as well, is a sort of medical field to do with the creation of drugs, different medicines and drugs to combat various medical complaints, because now the power available and memory available in computing systems is such that new discoveries in medicine are being made much faster than they used to be. And I think it's only a matter of time before one goes into the doctor's surgery and says, I've got this, that and the other wrong with me. And the computer says, okay, well, I'll design a drug for you and you take this one 3 times a week. And I think that is an area that has huge potential, and of course it's of great benefit to society.
Thank you. What about you, Kalervo?
Well, I think that roughly 50 years ago I decided to go to medicine. I'm so dull that I think I probably would do the same choice again. And why?
I think there is actually what you already said, that for instance, brain research and how the mind and your mind and your body is interacting, I think they're extremely fascinating areas. So I think I would choose again like that, something in this area.
Okay. What about you, Saeed?
I think it's a lot easier for me to pretend to be 18, relatively speaking. I think I would still choose computer science. I mean, if you look at today's news and everything, our heroes are slightly changing. I mean, Elon Musk wants to go to space, which is very exciting. He's sending his cars away, and it's in the news all over. Tesla is bringing electric cars. Mark Zuckerberg is ruining the society. I mean, and they're all technologists. They are all from IT. And if I was 18, I would say that this would really, really attract me towards computer science. And of course, then there is artificial intelligence and AI, machine learning, and the steps towards those go through a degree of bachelor's in computer science. So that would be my path.
Okay, thank you.
2 years ago, my answer would have been arts, philosophy, and something that relates to creativity, because at that time that it was thought that robots or artificial intelligence cannot replace the skills that are related to creativity and etc. etc. But now I know that they can even have empathy, so that I would make the same wise choice that I made 45 years ago. I would stick on history because it's about the context, to understand where you are. That would be good.
Okay, well, I'm very happy that you all feel so comfortable about the decisions that you made as young people. I am too. I'm very happy to be a phonetician in this particular university. Couldn't be better. So, but now that we know your premises, it's a big question, and I know there's no time to really go through any of it, not even the surface, I suppose. But I was thinking that we are all now facing global huge challenges, and we are supposed to think of them from our own perspective and trying to figure out what we can help with which tools and in sort of which spheres we are dealing with these same questions. And I'm thinking about things like safety, water, social issues, equality, things like this, of course, sustainable energy and stuff like that. So if you had to pick just one, I'm being very evil, but if you had to pick just one, which would you consider to be the, well, you can pick two, I'm being nice now, but you have to pick one which you think is of most significance now, acutely. And then also pick a question or an issue which you think you might be of help with. I mean, what you can actually do, or what you think you might be doing for the whole society or for your proximity, in the sense that, for instance, what you would do for education that would save the world, or what you would do, well, you said you were lazy, so you could probably do much, but sorry, but you said it first, it wasn't me. Yeah. But yeah, that was the weird question. What would you pick as the biggest challenge of the moment, and is there a challenge that you might do something about?
Well, I would say that, for example, it could be water, and it's easy to save water. You don't drink that much, you don't wash yourself.
Oh, good.
But I think this is going to be a huge problem in the future, and it's already.
And do you think that's something that you might help the world with?
I don't think that I have such vision that I would globally help.
But on a small scale?
Small things.
Right. Well, yeah. What about you, David?
I think that one of the greatest challenges facing society at the moment is the horrible, terrible expansion of terrorism in various ways, various respects. There is, of course, politically motivated terrorism, and the world has seen a number of examples of that, sadly, already. There are also individuals who, for no apparent reason, decide to carry out some terrorist action. And I think we should make life as difficult as possible for those people. And one of the threats I see is the drones that one can now buy in a shop for 100 or 200 euros. And if a terrorist gets hold of a little container of ricin this big and puts it in a drone and flies the drone into the middle of London or New York, they can wipe out millions of people. And I think it's only a matter of time before that happens, so we should make it I think drones should be banned. I think they should be completely illegal for individuals, and I think there should be very serious punishment for anybody operating them or selling them. I think that's one of the biggest threats facing society at the moment. It's only a matter of time before one of these terrorists, and many of them have been to good universities and have got degrees and a lot of technical knowledge, it's only a matter of time before one of them creates real havoc and kills huge numbers of people. I think we have to stop it. I think it's something that not enough attention has been paid for.
Thank you. What about you, Kalev?
Well, I think I'm not that pessimistic than my colleague here, but on the other hand, quite pessimistic. I think that our generation, we have destroyed most of the nature on the globe. It's your generation who should rebuild it again. How to do it? I think the only thing is, and here I think we need the education, and especially the quality of education. We need to change in our mindset, so that we start to feel again that it is our responsibility as a human beings, that we have the responsibility also for all other species and the whole nature as a whole, because nobody else can have it.
Yeah. Well, on the very basic food issues, I think my mind instantly goes to like water, sanitation, and food, probably because of the background where I'm from South Asian country. But I think one of the most important one where technology can actually help, and that would be this removing the social divide between people, whether that's political or whether that's religious, to promote more inclusivity, to teach people that it's okay to have different opinions, that it's okay to have a different religion, it's okay to have a different way of life. And I think it also goes towards the solution to the terrorism that you discussed. If we are tolerant towards other and we are able to have and sit down and have a dialogue and not resort to, let's say, extreme measures to get our point across, then I think that is a much more permanent solution. Also, I would like to go back to the point of the drones, is that I agree with you that banning drones would, for the moment, would be a good solution, but I'm not a proponent of banning things. Technology will always find a way. It will move on. It will progress. So putting some kind of, let's say, a strong legal hurdle in a way will delay it, but not stop it. So we need more inclusive measures in that sense. And I think, yeah, these would be two: provide food and then the mental growth or the capabilities.
I like what you said about the mental growth. I fully agree with you. And I'm happy that Kalervo will take care of the climate change and environmental issues with my wife, who works well for the Ministry of Environment. That's solved then. But I think that I've been very happy to work with the World Bank, with the developing countries on teacher education and problems there. And I have found out that they can stay at the school from 3 to 4 years, and the children cannot even read 2 syllabus simple word, or cannot count 2 plus 2. So for us, the children are in education to learn, but there are many countries, there are hundreds of pupils that stay at the school but they don't learn. And I think that this is the global responsibility of my country and my government to contribute to improve the teacher education and the early childhood learning in developing countries.
Excellent. Now that we are at the university, I think it's only fair to turn towards education as a whole, if you don't mind. And if you do, then you go ahead and mind as much as you will, because that's what we'll do in any case. Because you just opened the box which I wish to open. So education and equality and access to education. That's certainly a global issue and a huge problem. But how do you see it in the national scale? Anyone can answer certainly, but you must be the center of this. And Kalervo is going wild already. But what I mean is that access to equal opportunities to basic education or higher education even. Do you have an opinion on that? Kalervo obviously does.
Well, I think that first of all, every child deserves the best possible education that the nation can provide. And I think if we can accept that as a, let's say, basic value in any society and all societies, then we automatically start to improve many things you mentioned and you mentioned. And I think if I continue what Ilkka was saying, that we as a nation, I think we are a good example of that. After the Second World War, we were one of the poorest countries in the Europe. Actually, I think the only thing where we have good political consensus was that every child deserves the best possible education. And I think we have shown that it's a very, very strong way to improve your society. I think we should advocate that.
Okay.
If I can add a third world perspective to your point, I totally agree with you. Being from Pakistan, I'm a very big admirer of the way the education system here works and the way it is provided to the people of Finland and even to people like me. And I wish that it was the same around different places, and I wish it was the same in my country as well. Yeah.
But because of the rapid change in the labor market and globalization and robotization, whatever the drivers of the change are, we must be sincere that if you look at what is happening in Finland, the social background has a stronger impact than it used to have. I mean, if you look at the results of the PISA studies, PIAC studies, and our national studies from the National Agency of Education, you can see that there has been change. It's not only the structural or economic change, but it's also very difficult change in attitudes. But the Finnish boys, they tend to be proud of their capacities and skills in maths and STEM skills. But now you see that there's a loss of confidence, and they do not think anymore that this is useful to study STEM areas. So there are in our society problems too. And Kalervo is right. This is the objective, this is the target, this is our ideology. But we must do more in order to solve the problem that we perhaps first time during our generation is facing. That there is a real strong impact of social background and other changes in the labor market. So we have to tackle that. Otherwise, we are not the flagship anymore.
Is it only a social problem in the sense that families come from different social backgrounds, but also just the area policy issue that there are sort of, I'd say, very good ideas how to improve, for instance, language skills, foreign language skills in little children, like starting earlier and with a greater variety than just English, which is brilliant, I think. But at the same time, it's very, very problematic. Considering someone living in a very small village somewhere in northern Finland, how does that little boy over there get interested in French? Because if you have to start with something else than English, how do we get that boy interested in French at the first grade and then get interested in English later? If he comes from a surrounding where the parents are not that interested in French or for English that matter. So I think it's also a question of big cities versus smaller places and the teachers doing their best everywhere. But the reason why I brought this up is that since we're at the Department of Future Technologies now, then it probably means that we have a lot to do. I mean, solutions for little children to study in an efficient way, no matter where they live, giving equal opportunities to everyone. It has to be digital because we can't move people around that much, but we can send. I've learned that you can not only use the pigeon and the little piece of paper attached to the leg. I've now noticed that there's electricity which can, do most of the pigeon work nowadays. So that's why I shifted to this faculty and not in the humanities anymore. Sorry if there are any people from humanities, sorry about that. But yeah, this is something that I'm very interested in at the moment, and that's why I brought it up. But I was glad to hear that you don't see the problem in the area-wise issue. It's probably because you already thought across the, the borders by seeing the possibilities of digital learning.
Yeah.
Yep. David.
It seems to me that e-learning is definitely going to make a very, very rapid progress in the direction that I think we all agree we want to go, educating as many people as possible, as well as possible. It's already the case that one can take courses at the University of Stanford and many other high caliber educational establishments by email and by watching lectures. There are courses structured for people who are learning at home and teaching themselves. And I believe that such facilities can be expanded and will be expanded. And that I think the time is coming when more than half the people in the world will actually be educated in that way. A very good example is my friend Adrian Chiuk, who will be, I think, coming here for 6 months in July. He has a daughter who is now, she was at school, she didn't like school, she's very bright. She's now learning at home and she's about to start taking classes from a high school in America which accepts gifted children, and the level of teaching is very high. And I think her generation and subsequent generations will benefit hugely from advances in e-education. So I agree with what you said. I think that's a really huge potential area for the future.
I think that technology could be part of the solution, but as I mentioned in my presentation, we have a huge problem because at the moment we have in the whole population from 15 to 64 years, million people who do not have the skills they need in the future. How to reskill, how to re-educate in order to be possible for them to live a decent life in future. And that is because I think that we have kind of a generational agreement, however you want to call it, between different generations, because in Finland we have a very rapidly aging population, and you can count that the age-dependent expenditure and public expenditure will increase rapidly. So how we spend our public purse, how we spend our public money, what will be, I would say, even though my background in innovation and research and higher education, I would invest basic education, early childhood education, and then create a system where the individual learners, companies, and the educational institutions, the different parts will finance the lifelong learning. That will be a huge task, how to break down the public budget in order to be able to do decent life for everyone. I think that this is something we have to count on when we are dealing issues in our own field.
Yeah,
I completely agree. I think even being the rector of the university, I definitely think that the primary school is much more different, much more important than university.
Oh dear. Well, you touched upon the topic I was going to ask you about, that is lifelong learning. You also said that you can now take courses from here and there and build up your expertise in a very unconventional way. Do you see, how do you see us as being involved in all this? Is it the university that should take up one more thing to do on the to-do lists? We have the social impact now in addition to education and research, but should we also have this sort of lifelong learning block? Who dares to say something? You do.
I think that the universities should have the moral responsibility for offering courses, e-courses, so that people all over the world can take those courses at a university level. And I think the school systems should also have a responsibility for devising a similar idea for school-age children, so that, for example, an 8-year-old in the middle of Africa who has access to the internet can learn what 8-year-old children should be learning.
I would also like to add a little bit to it that, of course, the universities would have to do something, otherwise they would lose the position that they have. Yeah. Like people from my generation, they are sort of, or the ones actually who are coming in are sort of used to this instant learning, instant gratification type of model. So in 3 months you go to a course, you have to take a lecture, maybe do an assignment, in 4 months you get a grade, while he can just stay at home, watch the whole videos in 1 month and have better skills, which gives him the job and gives him access to the money and all, like right away. So if he has to choose between these two, of course he will go for the second one. So the university, my personal suggestion or thinking in a way is that there should be a hybrid model, because it's not just about the, let's say, memorizing things or learning. One of the best things that the university or schooling has done for me is dealing with people, interactions, working in groups. You can't have that online. How many people do I meet? It's an international university. How many cultures have I explored by being here? That is something that cannot be replicated online. So that is a very big strength for the universities, and I think it would be better if these two can be merged somehow, the digital and the social interaction benefits of it.
Yes, but of course we have to allow for the fact that there are so many millions of people everywhere who do not have the opportunity or the possibility to go to university. I mean, like you, I'm very glad I went to university, but for those who can't, I think we should find alternative ways of teaching them, maybe not quite as well. There isn't the same level of one-to-one interaction as people get in a tutorial, for example. But I think that teaching university-level subjects electronically is a very good substitute for the benefit of people who can't otherwise go to university.
I absolutely agree with you. I have been, and it's also to point out, I have this short experience with building an online course like this, in which I was supposed to, whatever I have learned to give in the online course, and I would say that it's very difficult to do in a way. I mean, compared to university teaching, but it's something that we have to do no matter what. Yes.
I think it's the same with the lifelong learning issue at the universities and our involvement in that business, because that's what it is, and that's what it's going to be, a huge business. And in a way, I believe that even though it's quite demanding to take up new tasks and new responsibilities, but still, who would do it if not the universities? It has a high quality label in it attached, and also, as I said, it's business also. At the same time as we are making the world better with science and education, we might take some money to go along with that. It doesn't really make us too bad, does it? Now we have a little time for if there are any questions in the audience. Yes, please.
I do have a question for the audience. It has been very interesting to hear life experience and how you see our today and our future. And my question, and I really like how you came with a panel. And my question is actually, and I love technology, but my question is about values. I think one of the key issues that is happening in different parts of the world, as you were mentioning, attitudes, is values. And I'm not so sure how those can be taught if it's not by example, if it's not by practicing. I mean, it's not something you can embody and transmit it. And on the other hand, I know a lot of countries, well, in my case, I'm from Mexico, I see is having a challenge about these values. And you can see it when you connect with terrorism, with respect of nature, and with different of the challenges you had in mentioned. Then my question with your life experience and all the understanding is how we can address attitudes and values for the future. For today or for the future?
Oh, well, that's an easy one. Who wants to do it first?
Because I'm from the ministry, I have the responsibility to answer all the questions. I have a very concrete example that relates what you said. I'm a member of the project group that is responsible of drafting first version of proposal for the very huge reform. It's a social security system. It's not in this government period, it will be the next one. And they wanted to start with the higher level civil servants and politicians and representatives of labor market. Why not start on the playing ground and start discussing values? What are the values that guide our social security system? But that's not possible, because the values are always in certain context. There must be. They are related to something real. Because we all in the Western society, we are in favor of liberty, democracy, and the beauty, and whatever the Kantian values or whatever the values are, we tend to agree. And then we start to balance them. If you put much on efficiency, then you have to perhaps give not that much of discussion on the democracy. So all you have, you can be in favor of those key values, but you always have to balance those. How in concrete situation? And therefore, I like the question because it is always not only by example, by own experience, but be rational and reasonable when you teach values, so that at the end of the day, it's question of meaningful life or good life. But they are in real situation, and therefore it's very difficult, because you live in society.
Yeah, and we depend from it. I don't know, I have conflict with it.
And I think that values are usually the result of some sort of negotiation, whether internal or external. And this type of thing then has to be negotiated and result from discussion, and not like, I'll give you my values. But
just a small comment on that. Actually, I think that when we are talking about values, then I become very worried about the present-day internet and all this, which actually, I think that our values, we can build them together much better than being alone and isolated from the others. I mean, and there, I think that we even need some physical interaction.
Yes.
And this is why I'm very worried about, for instance, that to what direction internet and all these things are going, because on the other hand, they make much more easier for us to be in a very big community. However, if the personal responsibility disappears in this large community, then you will lose your values. And I think that this is also what, especially those who are working with technology, should think very carefully at the moment. I think we are seeing so much hate discussion in the internet at the moment that since now we have 100 years from our civil war, which was the bloodiest civil war in Europe, maybe in the world. And it's very, very, I mean, I think it's very, how should I say, when you think what happens in a couple of months, in October and in November 1917, we were very much having same opinion when the independence would go. In 2 months, after 2 months, we were killing each other like a crazy. 2 months after that, there was thousands, tens of thousands of people were killed just because you had to sit, you just happened to sit there. Maybe we should shoot you, then let's take another one from 3 person from that. So we disappeared. I mean, we lost our sense, common sense and values in less than half a year. And nobody knows why that happened.
I believe this sort of relates to your talk about sex with machines and marriage with machines, in the sense that what I came to think of then was that also in the marriage and the having a relationship with something that is not very conventional is also a question of, if something is possible, does it mean that it's acceptable? Is it in our values? Is it the things that the human dignity aspect? And all these come together, which I have to say, when I was asked to chair this panel and when I decided to come here today, this is not what I expected. I thought that we'll be talking about technological advances and talking about zeros and ones and codes. I heard that word only twice, I think, in females not being interested in coding. That's it. And I thought that it's going to be very, very technological discussion, and I thought that I have no place in it. But now I feel like I'm back into my humanities roots. Here we are talking about the values of a nation, of a person, of the net, the values of how to do science, how to convince people to do the right thing, and how to save the world with research and education. I think at this point I wish to thank all the people who took part in this discussion. It's a very difficult word for a phonetician. And then also let's give them a hand. Thank you. And we also managed to end it at the time when you probably will make it to your car in time.
It's not my car.
Someone else's car. And also, I'll just let you
I have the
remember,
opportunity to.
this will continue in Agora 4th floor. Please come and join us for lovely discussions and some presentations as well. Nice seeing you.
Okay, thank you very much, Maija and Andersen. And here you can actually get the program for upstairs. So there's actually quite a lot of program, but also a lot of snacks. So feel welcome to 4th floor in Agora.
Kiitos. Kiitos. Mulla on hirveän kylmät kädet. Pidetäänkö kauan kädestä? Kato nyt. Eikö ihan kauhean? Miten on tämmöistä?
Se on millainen teknologiafriikki ympäristöön sä oot tullut.
Ihan järkyttävää.
Eikö se ole? Sanotaan teknologiaksi monimuotoisessa yliopistossa. Kaikkien muita.
Thank you. It's very nice meeting you. Yeah, thank you. A very interesting talk. Thank you very much. Thank you. It was very interesting. And thank you, teenager. That was funny. Even though I felt very old when you said that you are close to it. Well, for heaven's sake! I think it is. I don't like this. I just turned 44. I feel aged. That's really bad, but you're half honest, so that's good.
Yeah, yeah.
So how long have you been
I think
here?
I'm always learning about myself, which makes it slightly better for me.
Yeah, it is. Have you been in Turku for long?
I did my master's here, and I
Oh,
stayed
really?
for a little while.
Oh, so you really know your Finnish.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's just surprises me in a way.
How is your Finnish?
Sorry?
How is your Finnish?
Pretty bad.
Oh, good.
My only disappointment area is that I didn't sometimes really Finnish. But my curiosity is that I would like to know what's saying in the past. And I see some things talking about it. I don't actually know what they're talking about. It's like, are there conversations that we have these conversations here?
Right.
Do they also discuss political issues? Those are things like that.
I think they talk about
Very,
very boring, nothing fancy going on, nothing high standard politics.
But it would be interesting to know like what is like voting for and what's voting for us and like what's there in common. So far like in general discussion, this is in English and others is not
Right,
the same issue discussed all the time. So you actually don't get a real feel.
Yeah. Well, it's like today, sex and marriage. That's what we
It's pretty unique. Is there a barrier between the borders language wouldn't be a barrier soon enough. So I guess
I think that will also put this forward. And we have to raise the three of them. We can discuss all of them.
Somebody